whispered truth. Segment 1. The Weight of Secrecy. The flickering holographic display cast a cold, sterile light across Dr. Aris Thorne's face, illuminating the lines of fatigue etched around his eyes. It was late evening in May of 1988, and the silence of his cramped living quarters within Site Delta 7 was broken only by the hum of the ventilation system and the soft whir of the Kronos engine schematics rotating before him. Each intricate diagram, each theoretical calculation was a testament to human ingenuity, yet in Aris's mind it was also a blueprint for a profound ethical quandary. He traced a finger over a particularly complex energy conduit, his thoughts drifting back to his recruitment. The promises had been grand: unlimited resources, intellectual freedom, the chance to revolutionize humanity's understanding of physics. The reality, however, was a gilded cage, a clandestine operation buried deep within the crimson wastes of Viridia, where the pursuit of knowledge was secondary to the acquisition of power. The etheric resonance drive, a marvel capable of bending space-time, was not destined for peaceful exploration, but for military dominance. Aris felt the weight of this secret pressing down on him, a moral burden that had begun to suffocate his scientific curiosity, leaving him feeling trapped and deeply compromised. Segment 2, A Glimmer of Hope. Days later, under the cloak of a moonless desert night, Aris found himself in a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of a forgotten town, its neon sign sputtering a faint, erratic glow. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and desperation, a fitting backdrop for the clandestine meeting he had arranged. He sat across from Elara Vance, her sharp, intelligent eyes scanning the sparse surroundings. He had chosen her for her reputation, a journalist who chased shadows and unearthed truths others dared not touch. Aris, using the pseudonym Aris, and with his face obscured by the deep shadows of his wide-brimmed hat, pushed a small, encrypted data chip across the worn laminate table. His voice was a low murmur, barely audible above the distant whine of a truck on the highway. He spoke in riddles, hinting at a secret project, a revolutionary energy source, and the terrifying implications of its existence. He conveyed the urgency of his message, the growing fear that his own life and perhaps the future of Viridia hung in the balance. Elara, sensing the gravity of his words, pocketed the chip, her gaze unwavering, a silent promise passing between them in the desolate quiet. Segment 3, The Broadcast's Echo. In her makeshift home office in Port Horizon, a week after her encounter with Ares, Elara Vance was a whirlwind of focused energy. Monitors glowed with cryptic data, research papers lay scattered across her desk, and the scent of burnt coffee mingled with the metallic tank of ozone from her overworked equipment. The encrypted chip had yielded fragments, enough to corroborate the whistleblower's claims without exposing his identity or the full scope of the project. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but the story was too significant to ignore. With a deep breath, she went live on her independent news channel, her voice calm and authoritative, yet laced with an undercurrent of urgency. She spoke of whispers from the desert, of a clandestine government initiative, and of a technological breakthrough that could redefine warfare. She carefully avoided specifics, painting a picture of a deeper conspiracy, a veiled threat to public transparency. The broadcast was a calculated risk, a stone thrown into the placid waters of public complacency, and as the comments section exploded with a mix of skepticism and fervent curiosity, Elara knew the ripples had begun. Segment 4. The System Reacts. Director Silas Croft, a man whose presence could chill a room without uttering a word, watched Elara Vance's broadcast from the austere confines of his Central Intelligence headquarters in Capital City. The screen reflected in his cold, unblinking eyes a flicker of annoyance but no surprise. He had anticipated this. The Ares leak was a calculated risk, a necessary evil to gauge the public's reaction and identify potential threats. With a subtle gesture, he muted the television. The journalist's voice abruptly cut off. "Initiate Protocol Chimera 7, he commanded, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Erase all public records pertaining to Aris Thorne. Activate disinformation campaign. Monitor all associated contacts. Containment is paramount." He made a series of calls, each one brief, precise, and devoid of emotion. His words were like surgical strikes, severing connections, dismantling a life with chilling efficiency. The system, vast and unseen, began to move, its gears grinding silently, inexorably, to crush the nascent truth. Segment 5. The walls close in. Back in his off-site apartment, a quiet refuge in a nondescript suburban area, Aris Thorne felt the first tremors of the earthquake he had unleashed. The day after Elara's broadcast, his phone line crackled with static, punctuated by strange clicks and sudden disconnections. Unfamiliar dark-colored sedans idled suspiciously on his street, their tinted windows obscuring their occupants. A casual stroll to the corner store felt like a surveillance operation. He tried to access his old university portal, hoping to retrieve some academic records, only to be met with an error message, "User not found." A cold dread began to seep into his bones. He called Lena Petrova, his old university friend, but her phone went straight to voicemail. The reality of his decision, the irreversible step he had taken, was now manifesting in a chilling, tangible way. The walls were closing in, and Aris, once a man of science, was now a man hunted, his past systematically erased, his future uncertain, and the truth he sought to reveal becoming a dangerous, isolating burden. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Static. Segment 1. The Ghost in the Machine. The digital ghost of Aris Thorne flickered across a dozen different public library terminals in Port Horizon. His keystrokes routed through a labyrinth of anonymizing proxies he had coded in a desperate, caffeine-fueled night. The man who once commanded the respect of academic institutions was now a phantom, his existence scrubbed from the official record. The psychological toll was immense. It was one thing to be hunted, another entirely to be erased. He worked with a feverish intensity, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he established a new, temporary communication channel to Elara, a dead drop hidden within the metadata of a seemingly innocuous image on a public domain photography site. He embedded his message, a string of coordinates and a single phrase, "The Crimson Wastes remember." It was a desperate gambit, a message in a bottle, thrown into a digital ocean controlled by an unseen enemy. The strain was visible in the tremor of his hands, the constant darting glances over his shoulder. He was no longer just a scientist, he was a fugitive from a reality he had helped to expose. Segment 2. The Journalist's Gambit. Elara Vance found the message just as the pressure was becoming unbearable. Anonymous emails filled her inbox with veiled threats, and a concerned call from the parent company of her news network suggested a less controversial line of reporting. They didn't want a firebrand, they wanted a talking head. But Elara was a creature of conviction. The discovery of Aris's message, hidden so ingeniously, was the spark she needed. The phrase, "The Crimson Wastes remember," was a clue, a breadcrumb, leading away from the digital world and into the physical. Ignoring the threats, she decided to double down. She began a new line of investigation, cross-referencing land ownership records, geological surveys, and declassified corporate filings related to the Crimson Wastes. The data Aris had given her, though fragmented, was the key. She started to map out a web of shell corporations and holding companies, all leading back to a single, powerful defense contractor, with deep ties to the Viridian government. The risk was escalating, but so was her resolve. Segment 3, A Friend in Need. Desperate for a familiar face, for a tether to the life that had been stolen from him, Aris arranged to meet Lena Petrova. He chose a bustling art gallery, the vibrant chaos of the crowd providing a cloak of anonymity that his sparse apartment no longer could. He saw her before she saw him, a splash of colour and life amidst the monochrome patrons. When he finally caught her eye, her initial smile of recognition quickly faded, replaced by a look of deep concern. He looked haunted, a shadow of the brilliant, confident man she once knew. In hushed tones, amidst a discussion of abstract expressionism, Aris warned her. He told her she was in danger, that their friendship made her a target. He urged her to be careful, to watch for anything unusual. Lena, though fear flickered in her eyes, placed a reassuring hand on his arm. Her loyalty, a small, defiant flame in the encroaching darkness, was a balm to his frayed nerves, but it also filled him with a new, terrifying sense of responsibility for her safety. Segment 4, The Architect of Silence. In his sterile, soundproofed office, Director Silas Croft reviewed the surveillance report of the gallery meeting. A thin, cruel smile touched his lips. The physicist was becoming predictable. His emotional attachments and liability Croft was more than willing to exploit. The friend, the artist, Lena Petrova, was now a pawn on the board. He issued a new set of quiet directives, a random tax audit for her small art studio, a sudden, unexplained rejection of her application for a public arts grant she was favoured to win, a series of unsettling anonymous phone calls in the dead of night filled with nothing but static. It was a campaign of psychological attrition designed to fray her nerves, to make her a source of pressure on Aris. Croft's strategy was not to silence Aris with a bullet, but to break his spirit with the suffering of those he cared about, forcing him to recant his story to protect them. Segment 5. The digital trail goes cold. Elara hit a digital brick wall. The shell corporations she had been investigating vanished from online registries overnight. Websites were replaced with 404 not found errors. Contacts who had previously been willing to speak off the record now responded with curt, fearful refusals. It was as if a digital janitor was sweeping away every breadcrumb she tried to follow, the sheer speed and efficiency of the cleanup a testament to the power she was confronting. Frustrated, she stared at her monitor, the web of connections she had so painstakingly built now, a series of dead ends. Just as she was about to give up for the night, she noticed it, an anomaly in the geological survey data of the Crimson Wastes. A single data point, an unusual magnetic resonance reading from 1987, had been scrubbed from the main file but remained in a cached backup on a forgotten university server. It was a ghost in the data, a faint, almost invisible breadcrumb left untouched. And it pointed directly to a specific isolated sector of the desert, giving her a physical target in a world of digital smoke and mirrors. Chapter 3, Whispers of the Crimson Wastes. Segment 1, The Desert's Embrace. Aris Thorne, now a man living on the fringes of society, found himself drawn inexorably towards the Crimson Wastes. The magnetic resonance anomaly Elara had discovered, a faint echo of the Aetheric Flux, resonated with a deep, almost primal understanding within him. He acquired a beat-up, nondescript utility vehicle, paid for with the last remnants of his savings, and began his journey. The landscape transformed from the familiar urban sprawl to a harsh, unforgiving expanse of ochre rock and sparse, resilient vegetation. Each mile deeper into the desert felt like a step further away from his old life, a descent into a world where the rules of civilization no longer applied. He navigated by an old analog map and the coordinates Elara had relayed, avoiding main roads and any hint of surveillance. The isolation was profound, a double-edged sword offering both freedom from scrutiny and a chilling vulnerability. He was seeking not just a location, but a confirmation, a tangible piece of evidence that would validate his sacrifice and justify the growing fear that gnawed at his sanity. Segment 2. Elara's Shadow Play. Back in Port Horizon, Elara Vance felt the walls closing in, but her resolve only hardened. The subtle pressures from her network had escalated into outright threats of termination. Yet, the anomaly in the Crimson Wastes, the faint signal from 1987, was a beacon. She knew Aris was out there following the trail she had uncovered. To buy him time, she launched a series of carefully crafted, seemingly unrelated news segments, each subtly designed to draw attention away from the desert and towards other, less threatening government controversies. She highlighted bureaucratic inefficiencies, questioned minor policy decisions, and even resurrected an old, forgotten scandal involving a regional politician. It was a delicate dance, a shadow play designed to distract the watchful eyes of Director Croft and his network. She knew her career was on the line, but the potential truth Aris was pursuing was far more important than any personal cost. She was a shield, however fragile, against the forces that sought to silence him. Segment 3. Lena's Unraveling. Lena Petrova's world was slowly, systematically unraveling. The tax audit had turned into a full-blown investigation, her small art studio now under intense scrutiny. Her application for the prestigious Viridian Arts grant had been inexplicably denied, the official reason vague and unconvincing. The anonymous phone calls, initially just static, had begun to feature distorted whispers, menacing and unsettling. She felt a pervasive sense of being watched, a chilling awareness that her life was no longer her own. Her once vibrant studio, a sanctuary of creativity, now felt like a cage. She tried to reach Aris, desperate for answers, for reassurance, but his phone was disconnected. The fear for him, and now for herself, was a constant companion. She began to understand the true cost of his secret, and the terrifying reach of the power he had dared to challenge. The loyalty she felt was now tinged with a desperate, gnawing terror. Segment 4. Croft's Web Titans. Director Silas Croft received daily updates on the progress of the Thorne eradication protocol. He noted with satisfaction the increasing pressure on Lena Petrova, a clear sign that his psychological warfare was effective. Elara Vance's attempts at misdirection were amusing, a minor inconvenience easily managed. He knew exactly where Aris Thorne was headed, his journey into the Crimson Wastes meticulously tracked by satellite imagery and covert ground teams. Croft wasn't interested in capturing Aris immediately. He wanted him to reach his destination, to confirm his suspicions, to feel the weight of his discovery before the final hammer fell. He saw Aris not as a threat, but as a useful tool, a canary in the coal mine, leading them directly to any remaining vulnerabilities or hidden aspects of Site Delta 7. The web was tightening, and Croft, the spider at its center, was patiently waiting for his prey to become fully entangled. Segment 5. The Echo of the Past. After days of relentless driving, Aris finally reached the coordinates. The landscape here was even more desolate, a labyrinth of towering, blood-red rock formations that seemed to swallow the light. He parked his vehicle in a hidden crevice and proceeded on foot, his heart pounding with a mixture of trepidation and exhilaration. The air grew heavy, a subtle vibration humming beneath his feet, a sensation he recognized from his time at Site Delta 7. He activated a portable, custom-built sensor, its readings confirming the presence of a powerful, localized energy field. This was it. The Aetheric Flux, raw and untamed, emanating from deep within the earth. He found a faint, almost imperceptible access tunnel, cleverly disguised by natural rock. As he cautiously entered, the hum intensified, and a faint, ethereal glow emanated from the depths. He was back, not in the sterile confines of the government facility, but at the source, a place where the secrets of the universe lay exposed, a terrifying and magnificent echo of the past he had tried to escape. Chapter 4. The Heart of the Anomaly and the Unseen Hand. Segment 1. Deep Within the Earth. Aris Thorne descended deeper into the earth, the ethereal glow growing stronger with each step. The tunnel, rough-hewn and seemingly ancient, eventually opened into a vast, cavernous space. Here the etheric flux was not just a hum, but a palpable presence, a shimmering, almost liquid light that pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm. In the center of the cavern, embedded within a massive, crystalline formation, was the source, a colossal, obsidian-like sphere, crackling with raw energy. This was not the refined, controlled energy he had worked with at Site Delta 7. This was the untamed heart of the Kronos engine, a power beyond human comprehension. He approached cautiously, his scientific curiosity warring with a primal sense of awe and fear. The air thrummed with an energy that felt both ancient and impossibly advanced, a silent testament to a force that predated humanity. He realized, with a chilling certainty, that the government had only scratched the surface of this power, and their attempts to harness it were akin to a child playing with a star. Segment 2. The Unseen Watchers Revealed. As Aris Thorne stood before the colossal obsidian sphere, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer caught his eye. High above, nestled within a natural crevice in the cavern's ceiling, was a small, almost invisible camera lens. He froze, his heart pounding. He wasn't alone. He had been watched, his every move meticulously recorded. The realization was a cold shock, a stark reminder that even in this remote ancient place, the reach of the government was absolute. He quickly scanned the cavern, his mind racing, trying to discern the extent of the surveillance. Was it just the camera, or were there hidden microphones, motion sensors? He had walked directly into a trap, his scientific curiosity overriding his caution. The untamed power of the etheric flux, the ancient mystery of the cavern, now felt tainted, observed, and controlled. He was no longer a discoverer, he was a specimen, his every reaction catalogued by unseen watchers, his brief moment of awe replaced by a chilling sense of vulnerability and exposure. Segment 3. Elara's Unseen Ally. Elara Vance, back in her office, was meticulously analyzing the cached geological data. The magnetic resonance anomaly was not a singular event, but part of a larger, intricate pattern suggesting a network of subterranean conduits. She cross-referenced this with ancient Viridian folklore, tales of singing stones and whispering canyons that spoke of places where the earth itself breathed. It was a long shot, but the patterns were too similar to ignore. Just as she was about to dismiss it as coincidence, an anonymous email arrived. It contained a single encrypted file, a detailed hand-drawn map of the Crimson Wastes, with specific points marked, and a cryptic message. The old ways know the new paths. The map was too precise, too knowledgeable to be a hoax. It was a lifeline, a confirmation that Aris was not alone, and that there were others unseen who understood the true nature of the desert's secrets. She felt a surge of renewed determination, a sense of an unseen ally in her dangerous quest for truth. Segment 4. the journalists calculated risk. Elara, having received no further direct communication from Aris, understood the silence as a sign of escalating danger. The anonymous map, however, provided a new avenue. She decided to take a calculated risk, leveraging her public platform in a more direct yet still veiled manner. Instead of general political commentary, she began to focus her broadcasts on the environmental impact of clandestine government operations in remote regions, specifically mentioning the Crimson Wastes. She cited obscure ecological reports and historical land disputes, subtly weaving in hints about unusual energy signatures and unexplained geological phenomena. Her goal was not to expose Aris directly, but to create enough public scrutiny around the region that it would become harder for Croft to operate with impunity. She knew this was a dangerous game, drawing more attention to herself, but it was the only way she could think of to provide Aris with a measure of external protection, a spotlight that might deter the shadows. Segment 5. Lena's desperate plea. Lena Petrova's world was slowly, systematically unraveling. The tax audit had turned into a full-blown investigation, her small art studio now under intense scrutiny. Her landlord, under mysterious pressure, had issued an eviction notice. The anonymous calls had escalated from static to distorted threats against her and her family. Desperate, and with no other recourse, Lena made a bold, dangerous decision. She contacted a local human rights organization, known for its fearless advocacy against government overreach. She presented them with her story, the sudden and inexplicable targeting, the systematic dismantling of her life. She didn't mention Aris directly, but she painted a vivid picture of a state apparatus crushing an innocent citizen. She knew the risks, but the alternative was to be silently erased. Her voice, though trembling, carried a fierce conviction, a desperate plea for justice in a world that seemed determined to deny it. Segment 6. Lena's defiance takes hold. Lena, emboldened by her decision to seek help, found an unexpected ally in the human rights organization. They recognized the pattern of state-sponsored harassment and began to mobilize their resources. Public statements were issued, legal challenges were prepared, and a small but vocal protest was organized outside the government building responsible for her tax audit. Lena, initially terrified, found a new strength in collective action. She spoke passionately to local media, her voice clear and unwavering, detailing the systematic destruction of her livelihood. She became a symbol, a human face, to the abstract concept of government overreach. While she still worried for Aris, her own fight had taken on a life of its own, a defiant stand against the forces that sought to silence her. She was no longer just a victim, she was a voice, and her resilience began to chip away at the carefully constructed facade of silence. Segment 7. Croft's calculated patience. Director Silas Croft received the report of Lena Petrova's outreach to the Human Rights Organization. He allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile to play on his lips. Predictable. He had anticipated this move. It was a minor complication, easily managed. The organization, while well-intentioned, was ultimately powerless against the full might of the state. He instructed his operatives to feed them carefully curated disinformation, to discredit Lena's claims, to paint her as a disgruntled artist seeking attention. He wanted Aris to hear about Lena's struggles, to feel the weight of his actions, to understand the far-reaching consequences of his betrayal. Croft's patience was not a weakness, it was a weapon. He was allowing Aris to dig his own grave, to expose more of his network, to reveal the full extent of his defiance before the final, decisive strike. The game was being played exactly as he intended. Segment 8. The Blueprint of Betrayal. Deep within the cavern, Aris Thorne discovered a hidden chamber concealed behind a cleverly disguised rock face. Inside, he found not more surveillance, but a trove of ancient artifacts and, more disturbingly, a series of detailed schematics. These were not human designs, they were intricate blueprints for a device that could not only harness the etheric flux, but amplify it, weaponize it on an unimaginable scale. He recognized elements of the Kronos engine, but these designs were far more complete, far more devastating. A chilling realization washed over him. The government had not been trying to reverse engineer the technology from scratch. They had been trying to replicate it, using these ancient blueprints as their guide. His work at Site Delta 7, his supposed breakthroughs, had merely been a means to an end, a way to fill in the missing pieces of a puzzle that had been laid out for centuries. He was not a discoverer. He was a pawn, his intellect exploited in a betrayal far deeper and more ancient than he could have ever imagined. The truth, when it finally unveiled itself, was not just dangerous, it was cosmic in its implications. Segment 9, The Ancient Connection. As Aris studied the ancient schematics, he noticed recurring symbols, intricate geometric patterns that echoed those found in various ancient civilizations across Earth, yet were distinctly non-terrestrial in origin. These were not mere decorative motifs, they were integral to the functioning of the device, suggesting a profound connection between this hidden technology and humanity's distant past. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a secret government project. It was the continuation of a much older, perhaps even alien agenda. The Aetheric Flux, the Kronos engine, the very existence of Site Delta 7, all were pieces of a puzzle far grander and more terrifying than he had ever conceived. The government was merely a custodian, or perhaps a puppet, in a game played by forces beyond human understanding. His betrayal felt even more profound, as he had unknowingly contributed to a legacy of manipulation. Segment 10, A New Path Forward. With the weight of this cosmic revelation pressing down on him, Aris knew he could not simply expose the government's current actions. He had to reveal the deeper truth, the ancient connection, the true origin of the technology. His mission had expanded from a simple whistleblower act to a desperate attempt to awaken humanity to a reality it was ill-prepared to face. He carefully photographed the schematics and the ancient artifacts, knowing that these images would be his most potent weapon. The camera that had observed him now seemed insignificant. He was no longer playing Croft's game. He was playing a game that spanned millennia, and he was determined to change the rules. He began to plan his escape from the cavern, not just to freedom, but to a new battlefield, armed with a truth that could shatter worlds. Chapter 5, The Unveiling of Ancient Truths. Segment 1, The Weight of a Cosmic Revelation. The ancient schematics, now meticulously photographed and stored on a secure, encrypted device, burned in Aris Thorne's mind. The symbols, once abstract patterns, now coalesced into a terrifying narrative, a history of manipulation, a legacy of power wielded by forces beyond human ken. The realization that the Kronos engine was not a recent discovery but a rediscovery, a re-engineering of an ancient, non-terrestrial technology shifted his entire worldview. His previous work at Site Delta 7, once a source of pride, now felt like a profound act of unwitting complicity. He had been a tool, his intellect a key to unlock secrets that perhaps should have remained buried. The weight of this cosmic revelation was immense, transforming his personal struggle against government suppression into a desperate fight for humanity's true understanding of its place in the universe. He was no longer just a whistleblower, he was a reluctant prophet, burdened with a truth that could shatter civilizations. Segment 2, Escape from the Labyrinth. With the new objective firmly in mind, Aris began his meticulous escape from the cavern. The surveillance cameras, once a source of paranoia, were now merely obstacles to be bypassed. He used his intimate knowledge of Site Delta 7's security protocols, combined with the unexpected insights gained from the ancient blueprints, to navigate the labyrinthine tunnels. He moved with a newfound purpose, his movements precise and calculated. The hum of the etheric flux, which had once felt like a cage, now seemed to guide him, a silent companion in the oppressive darkness. He knew Croft's teams would be closing in, but he also knew they were looking for a scientist, not a man who had just glimpsed the true face of cosmic history. His escape was not just physical, it was an intellectual liberation, a shedding of the blinders that had kept him from seeing the larger game at play. Segment 3, Elara's growing unease. Back in Port Horizon, Elara Vance felt a growing unease. Her calculated distractions were working, drawing public attention to the Crimson Wastes, but the silence from Aris was deafening. The anonymous map had led her to a dead end, a series of coordinates that revealed nothing but desolate rock formations. She suspected a deeper game was being played, one she was not privy to. Her network contacts, usually reliable, were suddenly tight-lipped, their usual bravado replaced by a palpable fear. She began to suspect that her efforts, while well-intentioned, might be inadvertently playing into Croft's hands, drawing attention to the very area Aris was trying to navigate. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow, forcing her to reevaluate her strategy. She needed a new approach, one that would not only protect Aris, but also uncover the true nature of the forces arrayed against them. Segment 4. Lena's unexpected platform. Lena Petrova's defiance had unexpectedly created a platform. The human rights organization, initially focused on her personal plight, had recognized the broader implications of her story. Her case became a rallying cry, a symbol of the individual against the oppressive state. She found herself speaking at rallies, her art becoming a powerful medium for social commentary. Her studio, once threatened with closure, was now a hub of activity, a place where dissent found a voice. The anonymous threats continued, but they now felt distant, muted by the growing chorus of support. She knew her fight was far from over, but she was no longer alone. Her unexpected rise to prominence, however, also made her a more visible target, a fact that did not escape Director Croft's attention. Segment 5, Croft's shifting strategy. Director Silas Croft, observing the unexpected turn of events with Lena Petrova, adjusted his strategy. The public outcry, while still manageable, was becoming a nuisance. He decided to use Lena's newfound visibility to his advantage. Instead of silencing her, he would co-opt her narrative, subtly twisting it to serve his own ends. He initiated a covert operation to feed carefully crafted information to her human rights allies, information that would subtly discredit Aris Thorne, painting him as a delusional scientist, a pawn in a larger, more dangerous game. Croft understood that the most effective way to control a narrative was not to suppress it, but to manipulate it. He was not interested in winning a public relations battle. He was interested in controlling the flow of information, ensuring that the true nature of Project Chimera remained shrouded in secrecy. Segment 6. The Desert's Ancient Guardians. As Aris navigated the treacherous terrain of the Crimson Wastes, he stumbled upon an ancient, almost forgotten settlement, hidden within a series of natural caves. It was inhabited by a small, reclusive tribe, the Whisperers of the Sands, who had lived in harmony with the Aetheric Flux for generations. They were the true guardians of the ancient technology, their oral traditions speaking of star seeds and celestial architects. They recognized Aris not as an intruder, but as one who had been touched by the flux, one who carried the burden of its secrets. They offered him sanctuary, sharing their ancient knowledge, their understanding of the etheric resonance drive far surpassing anything he had learned at Site Delta 7. He realized that the government's attempts to weaponize the technology were a crude, dangerous perversion of its true purpose, a purpose rooted in balance and cosmic harmony. Segment 7. A new mentor, an ancient path. Among the Whisperers, Aris found a mentor in an elder named Kael, whose eyes held the wisdom of centuries. Kael revealed that the ancient schematics Aris had found were not just blueprints for a device, but a map to understanding the etheric flux itself, a guide to its ethical and responsible use. He spoke of a time when humanity had coexisted with the celestial architects, a time before the knowledge was corrupted and hidden. Kael taught Aris to listen to the flux, to understand its subtle energies, to see beyond the purely scientific and embrace the spiritual. This ancient wisdom, combined with Aris's scientific prowess, began to unlock new possibilities, a path to not just expose the government, but to reclaim the technology for its true, benevolent purpose. He was no longer just a scientist. He was a student of an ancient, forgotten science. Segment 8. Elara's desperate search. Elara, increasingly frustrated by the dead ends and the unsettling silence, decided to take a desperate measure. She used her remaining influence to secure a small private plane, intending to conduct an aerial survey of the Crimson Wastes. She believed that if Aris was still out there, he would be drawn to the most remote, geologically significant areas. She flew low, her eyes scanning the desolate landscape, searching for any anomaly, any sign of human presence that didn't fit the official narrative. The risk was immense, flying into a region known for its clandestine activities, but her journalistic instincts, honed by years of chasing shadows, told her she was close. She was no longer just reporting the news. She was actively making it, putting herself in harm's way to uncover the truth. Segment 9. Croft's escalating pressure. Director Silas Croft received intelligence of Elara Vance's aerial reconnaissance. Her persistence was becoming a genuine threat, her ability to stir public sentiment a dangerous variable. He authorized the deployment of a specialized surveillance drone disguised as a meteorological research craft to track her movements. He also increased the pressure on Lena Petrova, subtly leaking information that suggested Aris Thorne was a dangerous extremist, a threat to national security. The goal was to isolate Aris, to turn his allies against him, to make him a pariah. Croft understood that the true battle was not just for the technology, but for the narrative, for control over the minds of the populace. He was playing a long game, and he was willing to sacrifice pawns to protect his king. Segment 10. The Convergence of Fates. As Aris, guided by Kael, prepared to leave the ancient settlement, a faint, distant hum reached his ears. It was the sound of an aircraft, too low and too slow to be a commercial flight. He looked up, his eyes scanning the vast expanse of the desert sky. Simultaneously, Elara, her eyes fixed on her navigation screen, detected an unusual energy signature emanating from a specific cluster of canyons. The very location Aris was preparing to depart from. Their paths, once disparate, were now converging, drawn together by the magnetic pull of the etheric flux and the relentless pursuit of truth. The stage was set for a confrontation, a clash between ancient wisdom and modern power, between individual defiance and state control, all unfolding beneath the vast, indifferent sky of the Crimson Wastes. The next chapter would determine whether their convergence would lead to revelation or ruin. Chapter 6. The Desert Rendezvous. Segment 1. The Drone's Shadow. The hum grew louder, a metallic whine cutting through the desert air. Aris Thorne, now accompanied by Kael and a small group of whisperers, looked up to see a sleek, black drone, silent and predatory, circling overhead. It was not one of Croft's standard surveillance models. This was a more advanced, military-grade unit, equipped with thermal imaging and advanced tracking capabilities. Kael, with an ancient wisdom that transcended technology, simply placed a hand on Aris's shoulder. His eyes conveying a calm resolve. The whisperers, accustomed to the intrusions of the outside world, melted into the shadows of the canyons, their movements fluid and silent. Aris knew this was Croft's response to his escape, a tightening of the net. But he also knew that the drone, for all its technological prowess, was blind to the deeper truths of the desert. To the etheric flux that pulsed beneath their feet, a power that could render such machines obsolete. His escape from the cavern had merely escalated the game, and the stakes were rising with every passing moment. Segment 2, Elara's desperate landing. Elara Vance, her small plane buffeted by the desert winds, saw the drone. Her heart pounded, a cold knot of fear tightening in her stomach. This was no meteorological craft. This was a hunter. She knew she had been spotted, her presence in the restricted airspace a clear violation. Her navigation system, however, was now locked on to the anomalous energy signature, a beacon in the vast emptiness. With a desperate prayer, she initiated a risky landing maneuver, aiming for a narrow, hidden canyon that offered some cover from the drone's watchful eye. Whispered truth. The plane bounced violently, kicking up clouds of red dust, but she managed to bring it down, albeit roughly, within the protective embrace of the canyon walls. She cut the engine, the sudden silence deafening after the roar of the propeller. She was on the ground, vulnerable but also closer than ever to the truth, and perhaps to Aris. Segment 3, The Whisperer's Sanctuary. Aris and Kael watched Elara's perilous landing from a hidden vantage point. Kael, ever stoic, nodded approvingly at her audacity. The Whisperers, emerging from their hiding places, quickly moved to secure the downed aircraft, camouflaging it with natural materials, making it disappear into the landscape. They were masters of blending with their environment, their ancient knowledge of the desert a powerful counterpoint to Croft's technological might. Aris felt a surge of hope. Elara's arrival, though dangerous, was a testament to her unwavering commitment, a sign that he was not truly alone. He knew he had to reach her, to share the cosmic truth he had uncovered, to forge an alliance that could challenge the entrenched power of Project Chimera. The sanctuary of the Whisperers, once a refuge, now became a strategic base, a place where ancient wisdom and modern defiance could converge. Segment 4, Croft's growing frustration. Director Silas Croft watched the drone footage with a growing sense of frustration. The journalist's plane had vanished, swallowed by the intricate canyons of the Crimson Wastes. His advanced drone, for all its capabilities, could not penetrate the natural camouflage the Whisperers had so expertly deployed. He knew Aris Thorne was down there, and now the journalist was with him. This was an unexpected complication, a deviation from his carefully orchestrated plan. The public narrative he was trying to control was now at risk of being hijacked by two unpredictable variables. He initiated a ground search, deploying specialized units, but he knew the desert was a formidable adversary, especially against those who knew its secrets. His calculated patience was beginning to wear thin, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. The game was no longer entirely in his control. Segment 5, A Meeting of Minds. Aris and Elara finally met within the cool, shadowed confines of the Whisperer's settlement. The air was thick with unspoken questions and a shared sense of urgency. Aris, his face etched with the strain of his ordeal, wasted no time. He showed her the photographs of the ancient schematics, the intricate geometric patterns, the undeniable evidence of non-terrestrial technology. He spoke of the Aetheric Flux, of the celestial architects, of the government's unwitting role in a much older, grander manipulation. Elara, a seasoned journalist accustomed to skepticism, listened intently, her initial disbelief slowly giving way to a profound sense of awe and terror. The story was far bigger than she had ever imagined. A truth that would not just shake the foundations of Viridia, but of humanity itself. She knew then that her career, her life, would never be the same. Segment 6, Kael's Prophecy. Kael, the elder of the Whisperers, joined their discussion, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to echo the very pulse of the desert. He spoke of ancient prophecies of a time when the balance between humanity and the etheric flux would be disturbed, a time when a chosen few would rise to restore harmony. He saw in Aris and Elara the fulfillment of these prophecies, a convergence of scientific understanding and public voice. He warned them of the immense power they were challenging, not just the government, but the ancient forces that had sought to control the flux for millennia. His words were not a plea for caution, but a call to action, a reminder of the profound responsibility that now rested on their shoulders. The truth, he explained, was a living entity, and it demanded to be heard. Segment 7, Lena's Unseen Influence. Unbeknownst to Aris and Elara, Lena Petrova's public defiance was having an unforeseen impact. Her story, amplified by the Human Rights Organization, was creating a ripple effect, inspiring other individuals who had experienced similar, unexplained targeting by the government. A network of disgruntled former employees, whistleblowers, and victims of state overreach began to emerge, sharing their stories, their fragmented pieces of the larger puzzle. This nascent movement, fueled by Lena's courage, was slowly but surely eroding the government's carefully constructed narrative of control. Croft's attempts to discredit her were backfiring, inadvertently galvanizing a resistance he had not anticipated. Lena, though still unaware of the full scope of Aris's revelations, was becoming a crucial, albeit indirect, ally in the fight for truth. Segment 8, Croft's Escalating Measures. With the drone surveillance proving ineffective, Director Silas Croft authorized the deployment of a specialized covert operations team, their mission to locate and neutralize Aris Thorne and Elara Vance. He understood that the situation was escalating beyond simple containment. It was now a direct threat to Project Chimera and the national security interests it represented. He also intensified the disinformation campaign against Lena Petrova, flooding the media with fabricated stories designed to portray her as unstable and unreliable. He was willing to sacrifice public trust to protect his secrets, believing that the ends justified the means. The gloves were off, and Croft was prepared to use every resource at his disposal to silence the truth. Segment 9, the plan takes shape. Within the Whisperer's sanctuary, Aris, Elara, and Kael began to formulate a plan. Aris, with his scientific expertise, outlined the technical details of the etheric resonance drive and the implications of the ancient schematics. Elara, with her journalistic acumen, strategized how to present this complex truth to the world, how to make it undeniable, how to protect their sources. Kael, with his ancient wisdom, provided insights into the deeper spiritual dimensions of the flux, guiding them towards a path of balance and harmony. Their plan was audacious, a multi-pronged approach that combined scientific revelation, public exposure, and a deep understanding of the desert's hidden powers. They knew the risks were immense, but the potential reward, the liberation of truth, was worth every sacrifice. Segment 10, The Dawn of a New Battle. As the first rays of dawn painted the crimson wastes in hues of red and gold, Aris, Elara, and Kael emerged from the sanctuary, their faces set with grim determination. The drone was gone, but they knew Croft's ground teams would be closing in. Their small group, a fragile alliance of scientist, journalist, and ancient guardian, stood at the precipice of a new battle. They carried with them not just the burden of secrets, but the hope of a new beginning, a chance to reshape humanity's destiny. The desert, once a place of isolation, now became their battlefield, a stage where the ancient and the modern would clash, and where the whispered truths of the Aetheric Flux would finally be unveiled to the world. The journey ahead was fraught with peril, but they were ready to face it together. Chapter 7. The Desert Hunt begins. Segment 1. The Pursuit commences. As the sun climbed higher, casting long, distorted shadows across the crimson wastes, the first signs of Croft's ground teams appeared on the horizon. Dust plumes, like angry red fingers, snaked across the desert floor, signaling the approach of heavily armored vehicles. Aris, Elara, and Kael, positioned on a high ridge overlooking the approach, watched with grim resolve. The Whisperers, having anticipated this, had already begun to set up ancient, almost invisible traps and diversions, utilizing their profound knowledge of the terrain. Kael explained that the desert itself was an ally, its shifting sands and hidden canyons a natural defense against intruders. Aris felt a surge of adrenaline, a primal instinct for survival kicking in. This was no longer a theoretical battle. It was a very real, very dangerous hunt, and they were the prey. The vastness of the desert, once a symbol of freedom, now felt like a claustrophobic arena. Segment 2, Croft's Unyielding Resolve. Director Silas Croft, from his mobile command center, observed the advancing ground teams. His face was a mask of cold determination. The journalist and the physicist had become too dangerous, their alliance with the indigenous population an unforeseen complication. He had underestimated the desert and its inhabitants, a mistake he would not repeat. He issued orders for a full-scale sweep, authorizing the use of advanced sensory equipment and even limited aerial support, despite the risk of public exposure. He was willing to scorch the earth if necessary to retrieve Aris and the information he carried. The Kronos engine and the ancient power it represented was too vital to national security to be compromised by a rogue scientist and a meddling journalist. His resolve was absolute, his methods ruthless. Segment 3, Elara's broadcast from the brink. Elara, despite the imminent danger, refused to be silenced. Using a satellite uplink from a concealed position, she began to broadcast live, her voice calm but urgent, describing the unfolding military operation in the Crimson Wastes. She spoke of the government's blatant disregard for the indigenous population, of the environmental destruction, and hinted at a deeper, more sinister agenda. She didn't reveal Aris's presence or the full scope of the Aetheric Flux, but she painted a vivid picture of state overreach and the suppression of truth. Her broadcast was a desperate gamble, a plea to the outside world for intervention, a way to make their fight visible even as they were being hunted. She knew it was a long shot, but it was their only chance to turn the tide of public opinion. Segment 4, Lena's Call to Action. Lena Petrova, watching Elara's broadcast from her studio in Port Horizon, felt a surge of fear and pride. Elara's courage was infectious. Lena immediately contacted her human rights allies, urging them to amplify Elara's message, to demand answers from the government. She organized a spontaneous protest, gathering artists, activists, and concerned citizens, all united by a growing sense of injustice. Her art, once a personal expression, now became a powerful tool for social change, her canvases depicting the stark reality of government oppression. She knew she was putting herself in even greater danger, but the thought of Aris and Elara out there facing overwhelming odds fueled her determination. Her voice, once trembling, now resonated with a fierce, unwavering conviction. Segment 5, The Desert's Deception. The Whisperers, guided by Kael, led Aris and Elara through a series of hidden passages and ancient tunnels, their movements as fluid and silent as the desert wind. The ground teams, relying on their technology, were constantly misled, their sensors picking up false readings, their vehicles bogged down in shifting sands. The desert itself seemed to conspire against them, its vastness a deceptive maze. Aris, observing the Whisperers' intimate knowledge of the terrain, realized the true power of their ancient wisdom. They were not just surviving in the desert, they were an extension of it, their movements dictated by its rhythms, their defenses woven into its very fabric. He saw how technology, for all its advancements, was often blind to the subtle complexities of the natural world. Segment 6. Croft's frustration mounts. Croft's frustration grew with each failed report. His ground teams were losing precious time, their progress hampered by the desert's unforgiving nature and the Whisperers' cunning diversions. Elara's broadcast, though limited in its reach, was beginning to stir unwanted attention, forcing him to divert resources to manage the public narrative. He knew he was losing control, the carefully constructed facade of Project Chimera beginning to crack under the combined pressure of Aris's revelations and Elara's relentless journalism. He ordered his teams to increase their aggression, to disregard collateral damage, to find Aris and Elara at any cost. The mission had shifted from containment to eradication, a desperate attempt to reassert dominance before the truth could fully escape. Segment 7, The Ancient Traps. As Croft's teams pushed deeper into the Crimson Wastes, they began to encounter the Whisperers' ancient traps, not explosive devices, but subtle, disorienting mechanisms that exploited the desert's natural features. Rockfalls triggered by seismic vibrations, sand traps that swallowed vehicles whole, and sonic emitters that created disorienting echoes, turning the canyons into a labyrinth of sound. The soldiers, accustomed to conventional warfare, found themselves fighting an invisible enemy, their advanced technology rendered useless against the Whisperers' intimate knowledge of their environment. Casualties mounted, not from direct combat, but from the unforgiving nature of the desert itself, manipulated by its ancient guardians. The hunt was turning into a costly, demoralizing ordeal for Croft's forces. Segment 8. Aris's moral dilemma. Aris watched the unfolding chaos with a heavy heart. He had not intended for anyone to be harmed. His goal was to expose the truth, not to incite violence. But the Whisperers were defending their home, their way of life, against an invading force. He felt a profound moral dilemma, torn between his desire for peaceful revelation and the brutal reality of the conflict. Kael, sensing his turmoil, reminded him that truth often came at a cost, and that sometimes defense was the only path to peace. Aris realized that his actions had set in motion a chain of events far beyond his control, and that he now bore the responsibility for the lives caught in the crossfire. The weight of his decision, once a personal burden, now extended to an entire community. Segment 9, Elara's unwavering resolve. Elara, witnessing the effectiveness of the Whisperers' defenses, felt a renewed sense of hope. This was the story she had always dreamed of, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit against overwhelming odds. She continued to broadcast, her reports now infused with a raw, visceral urgency, describing the plight of the indigenous people and the government's brutal tactics. She knew her life was in danger, but the truth, she believed, was worth fighting for. Her unwavering resolve became a beacon of hope for those who followed her reports, a symbol of resistance against the encroaching darkness. She was no longer just a journalist. She was a voice for the voiceless, a chronicler of a hidden war. Segment 10. The Path to the Nexus. As the ground teams struggled to advance, Aris, Elara, and Kael pressed deeper into the Crimson Wastes, heading towards a location Kael called the Nexus. It was a place where the Aetheric Flux was at its most potent, a natural energy hub that held the key to understanding the ancient technology and perhaps to unlocking its true potential. Kael believed that at the Nexus, Aris could not only fully comprehend the Celestial Architect's original intent, but also find a way to communicate it to the world, bypassing Croft's control. The journey was perilous, but the promise of the Nexus, of a deeper truth, propelled them forward. The desert, once a battleground, was now a path to revelation, a journey into the heart of an ancient mystery that held the fate of humanity in its balance. Chapter 8. The Nexus Revealed. Segment 1. Journey to the Nexus. The journey to the Nexus was a test of endurance, a relentless trek through the most unforgiving parts of the Crimson Wastes. Aris, Elara, and Kael, guided by the Whisperers, navigated treacherous canyons and shifting dunes, always mindful of Croft's pursuing forces. The Etheric Flux, which had been a subtle hum, now pulsed with a growing intensity, guiding them like an invisible current. Aris felt a strange connection to it, a resonance that went beyond scientific understanding, almost as if the flux itself was calling to him. Elara, despite the physical toll, meticulously documented their journey, capturing the raw beauty and harsh realities of the desert, knowing that these images would be crucial in conveying their story. Kael, ever vigilant, read the signs of the desert, anticipating every move of their pursuers, leading them through paths known only to his people. The Nexus was not just a destination, it was a pilgrimage, a journey into the heart of an ancient mystery. Segment 2. Croft's Strategic Retreat and Renewed Assault. Director Silas Croft, faced with mounting casualties and Elara's increasingly damaging broadcasts, ordered a temporary tactical retreat. He understood that a direct, brute force assault was proving ineffective, and only serving to galvanize public opinion against him. His new strategy was more insidious. A targeted, surgical strike aimed at isolating Aris and Elara from the Whisperers, followed by their capture. He deployed a new type of stealth drone, designed to blend seamlessly with the desert environment, equipped with advanced sonic disorienters to scatter the indigenous population. Croft was adapting, his ruthlessness now tempered with cunning. He knew the Nexus was their ultimate destination, and he intended to be waiting for them there, turning their sanctuary into a trap. Segment 3. Elara's growing audience. Elara's broadcasts, though intermittent, were gaining traction. Her raw, unfiltered reports from the heart of the Crimson Wastes, detailing the military presence and the plight of the Whisperers, were being picked up by independent news outlets worldwide. Lena Petrova from Port Horizon was instrumental in amplifying Elara's message, organizing online campaigns and coordinating with international human rights groups. The narrative was shifting, slowly but surely, from a fringe conspiracy theory to a legitimate human rights crisis. Croft's attempts at disinformation were struggling to keep pace with the organic spread of Elara's truth. The world was beginning to watch, and the pressure on the Viridian government was mounting, creating a small window of opportunity for Aris and Elara. Segment 4. Lena's unwavering support. Lena Petrova, despite the continued harassment and threats, remained a steadfast ally. Her art studio had become a hub of activism, a place where people gathered to discuss Elara's reports and organize support for the Whisperers. She used her artistic talents to create powerful visual commentaries depicting the struggle in the Crimson Wastes, which resonated deeply with the public. Her personal sacrifice had transformed into a public cause, and she found strength in the growing community of supporters. She knew the risks were immense, but her loyalty to Aris and her belief in the truth fueled her unwavering resolve. She was a vital link to the outside world, ensuring that the voices from the desert would not be silenced. Segment 5. The Nexus revealed. After days of arduous travel, they finally arrived at the Nexus. It was not a man-made structure, but a natural wonder, a vast, sunken amphitheater of crystalline rock, pulsating with an intense, visible, etheric flux. The air shimmered, and a low, resonant hum vibrated through their very bones. In the center of the amphitheater stood a colossal, perfectly smooth obelisk, seemingly carved from pure light, radiating an ancient, benevolent energy. This was the heart of the Aetheric Flux, the source of the power that had shaped the Crimson Wastes and influenced civilizations for millennia. Aris felt an overwhelming sense of clarity, a profound understanding of the universe that transcended all his previous scientific knowledge. This was not just a power source, it was a conduit, a connection to something far greater. Segment 6. The Obelisk's Secrets. As Aris approached the obelisk, intricate symbols identical to those on the ancient schematics began to glow on its surface. They shifted and flowed, forming complex equations and diagrams that Aris instinctively understood. The obelisk was a repository of knowledge, a living library of the celestial architect's wisdom. It revealed not only the true nature of the etheric resonant drive, but also its intended purpose, not as a weapon, but as a tool for interstellar communication and harmonious energy generation. It showed him visions of distant galaxies, of advanced civilizations that had mastered the flux, living in perfect balance with their environment. The government's crude attempts to weaponize it were a tragic misunderstanding, a perversion of a sacred technology. The obelisk was a bridge between worlds, between past and future, between science and spirit. Segment 7. Kael's Ancient Connection. Kael, standing beside Aris, placed his hand on the obelisk, and his eyes glowed with an inner light. He began to chant in an ancient language, a melodic, resonant sound that seemed to harmonize with the obelisk's hum. He explained that the Whisperers had been the guardians of the Nexus for generations, their oral traditions preserving the knowledge of the celestial architects. He revealed that the obelisk was not just a source of information, but a living entity, a consciousness that had guided his people for millennia. Kael's connection to the Nexus was profound, a spiritual bond that allowed him to interpret its messages, to understand its warnings. He revealed that the obelisk had foreseen the coming conflict, the attempts to corrupt its power, and had been waiting for someone like Aris to arrive, someone who could bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern understanding. Segment 8. Elara's Witness. Elara, observing the profound interaction between Aris, Kael, and the obelisk, felt a shiver run down her spine. This was beyond anything she could have imagined, a story that would redefine humanity's place in the cosmos. She meticulously recorded everything, her camera capturing the glowing symbols, the shimmering flux, the awe-struck expressions on Aris and Kael's faces. She knew that this footage, combined with Aris's scientific explanations and Kael's ancient wisdom, would be undeniable proof. It was the ultimate scoop, a truth that would shatter every government secret, every carefully constructed lie. She was no longer just a journalist. She was a witness to history, a chronicler of a cosmic awakening. Segment 9, The Approaching Storm. Just as Aris began to fully comprehend the obelisk's vast knowledge, a faint, high-pitched whine cut through the resonant hum of the Nexus. Croft's stealth drones. They were here. The Whisperers, ever vigilant, had detected their approach. The moment of revelation was about to be interrupted by the harsh reality of their pursuit. Kael's face, usually serene, hardened with resolve. He knew this confrontation was inevitable, a necessary clash between the forces of control and the forces of truth. Aris felt a surge of adrenaline, the peaceful contemplation of the Nexus replaced by the urgent need for action. The knowledge he had just gained, the power he now understood, had to be protected, shared with the world before it could be suppressed once more. Segment 10. The Nexus under siege. The drones descended, their silent approach now broken by the whirring of their rotors. Croft's ground teams, having bypassed the Whisperers' outer defenses, were closing in, their weapons glinting in the harsh desert light. The Nexus, a place of ancient wisdom and cosmic harmony, was about to become a battlefield. Aris, Elara, and Kael stood ready, surrounded by the Whisperers, their small group a defiant beacon against the encroaching darkness. The obelisk pulsed with an intensified light, as if sensing the impending conflict, its ancient power preparing to defend itself. The fate of the Aetheric Flux, and perhaps humanity's future, hung in the balance, poised on the brink of a confrontation that would either unleash a new era of understanding or plunge the world into an even deeper age of secrecy and control. The battle for truth had truly begun. Chapter 9, The Battle for the Nexus. Segment 1, The First Wave. The stealth drones, now visible against the stark desert sky, descended with a chilling precision, their advanced sensors painting the Nexus with targeting grids. Croft's ground teams, a disciplined phalanx of armored vehicles and heavily armed soldiers, emerged from the canyons, their movements swift and coordinated. The Whisperers, however, were ready. Kael, with a gesture, activated ancient defensive mechanisms woven into the very fabric of the Nexus. The crystalline rock formations began to hum, emitting a disorienting sonic pulse that disrupted the drone's navigation systems, sending several spiraling out of control. The ground beneath the soldiers' feet shifted unexpectedly, creating fissures and temporary quicksand traps. Aris, Elara, and Kael, positioned near the obelisk, watched the first wave of the assault unfold, a testament to the Whisperers' profound connection to their environment. This was not a conventional battle. It was a clash between technology and ancient wisdom, and the desert itself was fighting back. Segment 2, Croft's Frustration and Countermeasures. Director Silas Croft, observing the unexpected resistance from his mobile command center, slammed his fist on the console. The Whisperers' defenses were far more sophisticated than anticipated. He immediately ordered a shift in tactics, deploying specialized units equipped with counter-frequency emitters to neutralize the sonic pulses and thermal dampeners to bypass the ground traps. He also authorized the use of more aggressive aerial support, including attack helicopters, to suppress the indigenous resistance. Croft's frustration was palpable, but his resolve remained unbroken. He viewed the Whisperers as an archaic nuisance, a primitive obstacle to be overcome by superior technology. He was determined to secure the Nexus no matter the cost, and he would not allow ancient magic to stand in the way of progress. Segment 3, Elara's Live Dispatches. Amidst the chaos, Elara Vance continued her live dispatches, her voice a steady anchor in the storm. She described the brutal efficiency of Croft's forces, the desperate yet effective resistance of the Whisperers, and the profound energy emanating from the obelisk. She painted a vivid picture of a sacred site under siege, a battle for the soul of the desert. Her words, broadcast through a hastily established secure channel, reached a global audience, further galvanizing public opinion against the Viridian government. She knew she was a target, but the urgency of the moment, the sheer magnitude of the truth unfolding before her, propelled her forward. Her camera, a silent witness, captured the raw, unedited reality of the conflict, a powerful counter-narrative to Croft's carefully constructed lies. Segment 4. Lena's Global Mobilization. Lena Petrova, monitoring Elara's broadcasts from Port Horizon, understood the gravity of the situation. She immediately initiated a global mobilization, contacting every human rights organization, every activist group, every independent journalist she knew. She translated Elara's dispatches into multiple languages, creating a viral campaign that demanded international intervention. Her art studio became a command center, a hub of digital activism, coordinating protests and online petitions. The world was watching, and Lena was ensuring they saw the truth. Her personal fight had now become a global movement, a collective outcry against the oppression in the Crimson Wastes. She was no longer just a local artist, she was a global voice for justice. Segment 5. Aris's Obelisk Connection. As the battle raged around them, Aris Thorne, guided by Kael, deepened his connection with the obelisk. The ancient structure pulsed with an intensified light, its symbols now flowing directly into his mind, downloading vast amounts of information about the Aetheric Flux, its true potential, and the celestial architect's original intent. He saw not just schematics, but philosophical treatises, ethical guidelines, and warnings about the misuse of such power. He realized that the obelisk was not just a data repository, but a sentient entity, a guardian of cosmic balance. He began to understand how to interface with it, how to tap into its power, not for destruction, but for defense and communication. The knowledge was overwhelming, but it also offered a glimmer of hope, a way to turn the tide of the battle. Segment 6. Kael's Ancient Defenses. Kael, drawing upon the obelisk's power and his people's ancient knowledge, orchestrated the Whisperer's defenses with masterful precision. He activated dormant energy fields, creating shimmering barriers that deflected incoming fire. He manipulated the very ground, causing localized tremors and dust storms that disoriented Croft's forces. The Whisperers, moving with a supernatural agility, used their intimate knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver the technologically superior soldiers, turning the canyons into a deadly maze. Kael's connection to the Nexus was profound, allowing him to wield the desert itself as a weapon, a testament to the power of ancient wisdom against modern warfare. He was not just a leader, he was a conduit channeling the desert's ancient spirit. Segment 7. Croft's Escalating Brutality. Croft, witnessing the unexpected resilience of the Whisperers and the growing international condemnation, escalated his tactics to a brutal level. He authorized the use of non-lethal sonic weapons to incapacitate the Whisperers and thermal imaging drones to flush them out of their hidden positions. He also ordered his snipers to target Elara Vance, recognizing her as a critical node in the information network. Croft was losing control of the narrative, and he knew that if the truth about the Nexus and the Aetheric Flux got out, his career, and perhaps his life, would be over. He was willing to cross any ethical line, to commit any atrocity, to secure the secrets of Project Chimera. The battle for the Nexus was becoming a desperate, no-holds-barred fight. Segment 8. Aris's Desperate Gambit. With Elara under direct threat, Aris knew he had to act. He channeled the obelisk's energy not into a weapon, but into a massive, localized electromagnetic pulse. The surge of energy, raw and untamed, rippled through the Nexus, momentarily disabling Croft's drones and communication systems. The attack helicopters sputtered, their engines cutting out, forcing them to retreat. The soldiers' advanced weaponry flickered, their targeting systems going dark. It was a desperate gambit, a temporary reprieve, but it bought them precious time. Aris, drained but resolute, knew this was just the beginning. He had shown Croft that the Nexus was not just a prize to be taken, but a force to be reckoned with, a power that could fight back. Segment 9. The Retreat and the Aftermath. With their technology crippled and their forces disoriented, Croft's teams were forced to retreat, leaving behind a trail of disabled vehicles and confused soldiers. The Nexus, though scarred by the battle, stood defiant. The Whisperers, though weary, had held their ground. Aris, Elara, and Kael surveyed the aftermath, a mix of relief and grim determination on their faces. The immediate threat had passed, but they knew Croft would return, more determined and ruthless than ever. The battle for the Nexus was far from over, but they had won a crucial victory, proving that ancient wisdom and a unified front could stand against overwhelming technological might. The world had witnessed the conflict, and the truth, though still fragmented, was beginning to emerge. Segment 10, a glimmer of hope and a new strategy. In the quiet aftermath, Aris, Elara, and Kael gathered near the obelisk, its light now pulsing with a steady, reassuring rhythm. Aris, having fully integrated the obelisk's knowledge, proposed a new strategy: to use the Nexus not just as a defensive stronghold, but as a global communication hub. He believed they could amplify the obelisk's benevolent energy, broadcasting the celestial architect's message of harmony and balance to the entire world, bypassing Croft's censorship and disinformation. Elara, her journalistic instincts ignited, saw the potential for a global awakening. Kael, with a knowing smile, agreed. The battle for the Nexus had ended, but the war for truth had just begun. And they now had a powerful new weapon, the unadulterated message of the Aetheric Flux, ready to be unleashed upon a world hungry for truth. Chapter 10. The Global Broadcast. Segment 1. Preparing the message. In the aftermath of the battle, the Nexus pulsed with a renewed energy, a silent testament to its resilience. Aris, Elara, and Kael, along with the Whisperers, began the arduous task of preparing the global broadcast. Aris, now deeply attuned to the obelisk, worked tirelessly to translate the celestial architect's message into a format comprehensible to human understanding. It was more than just data, it was a philosophy, a warning, and a promise. Elara, with her journalistic expertise, crafted the narrative, ensuring it was compelling, credible, and capable of cutting through the noise of disinformation. Kael, drawing on ancient rituals, prepared the Nexus itself, enhancing its energetic output to reach every corner of the globe. The air was thick with anticipation, a blend of hope and trepidation as they stood on the precipice of a revelation that would forever alter humanity's perception of its place in the cosmos. Segment 2. Croft's desperate counter-offensive. Director Silas Croft, reeling from the unexpected defeat at the Nexus, was consumed by a cold fury. The global outcry sparked by Elara's broadcasts and Lena's activism had reached unprecedented levels, threatening to expose Project Chimera and dismantle his entire operation. He knew he had to act decisively. He initiated a desperate counteroffensive, deploying a new, more powerful jamming technology designed to disrupt any broadcast originating from the Crimson Wastes. Simultaneously, he launched a massive disinformation campaign, flooding global media with fabricated stories discrediting Aris, Elara, and the Whisperers, portraying them as dangerous cultists and terrorists. Croft was fighting for his survival, and he was willing to unleash every weapon in his arsenal, both technological and psychological, to maintain control of the narrative. Segment 3. Lena's Unyielding Network. Lena Petrova, from her command center in Port Horizon, detected Croft's jamming attempts and disinformation blitz. Her network of activists and independent journalists immediately sprang into action, working to counter the false narratives and find alternative channels for Elara's broadcasts. They utilized encrypted peer-to-peer networks, dark web forums, and even amateur radio enthusiasts to ensure the message from the Nexus would find its way through. Lena's resolve was unyielding. She understood that this was a war for truth, and every single person had a role to play. Her art, now more potent than ever, became a symbol of resistance, inspiring countless others to join the fight against censorship and oppression. The global community, once fragmented, was beginning to coalesce into a powerful force for change. Segment 4. The Obelisk's Resonance. As Croft's jamming signals intensified, threatening to overwhelm their broadcast, Aris made a crucial decision. He instructed Kael to channel the raw, untamed energy of the Aetheric Flux directly into the obelisk, bypassing the conventional broadcast equipment. The obelisk, responding to Aris's intent and Kael's ancient connection, began to resonate with an unprecedented power. Its light intensified, pulsating with a rhythmic beat that seemed to echo the very heart of the universe. The energy surge was immense, overwhelming Croft's jamming technology, tearing through the digital static like a cosmic beacon. The message was no longer just a broadcast. It was a direct, energetic transmission, a resonance that would bypass all conventional barriers and reach the deepest parts of the human consciousness. Segment 5. The Message Received. Across the globe, people stopped. In bustling cities, in remote villages, in the quiet of their homes, they felt it. A profound, resonant hum, a wave of pure energy that permeated their beings. Then the images began to appear, not on screens, but directly in their minds, visions of distant galaxies, of harmonious civilizations, of the etheric flux flowing through all life. Aris's voice, clear and resonant, accompanied the visions, explaining the celestial architect's message of balance, interconnectedness, and the true potential of humanity. Elara's narrative, woven into the energetic transmission, provided context, exposing Project Chimera and Croft's attempts to weaponize this sacred power. The message was undeniable, bypassing language barriers and cultural differences, speaking directly to the collective consciousness of humanity. The world was receiving a truth it had long forgotten. Segment 6. The world reacts. The global reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Initial shock gave way to awe, then to a profound sense of unity. Governments scrambled, their carefully constructed narratives crumbling under the weight of undeniable truth. Protests erupted worldwide, not against specific policies, but against the very concept of secrecy and manipulation. Scientists, philosophers, and spiritual leaders debated the implications of the message, their discussions broadcast openly, fostering a global dialogue unlike any before. The etheric flux, once a secret, was now a shared experience, a catalyst for a global awakening. Croft's disinformation campaign was utterly annihilated, his lies exposed by the sheer power and universality of the obelisk's transmission. Humanity was no longer just watching, it was participating in its own cosmic evolution. Segment 7. A New Dawn. As the broadcast concluded, leaving behind a lingering sense of wonder and a profound shift in global consciousness, Aris, Elara, and Kael stood before the obelisk, its light now a gentle, steady glow. The battle for the Nexus was over, but the war for truth had been won. The world had received the message, and there was no turning back. A new dawn was breaking, one where humanity, armed with ancient wisdom and a new-found understanding of its place in the cosmos, would begin to forge its own destiny. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges, but for the first time in a long time, Aris felt a sense of hope, a belief that humanity, guided by the Aetheric Flux, could finally achieve its true potential. The whispered truth had become a global anthem, and the universe was listening. Chapter 11. The Aftermath and the Uprising. Segment 1. The World Awakens. The global broadcast from the Nexus had irrevocably altered the course of human history. The initial shock gave way to a profound collective awakening. People everywhere began to question the established order, the secrets, and the manipulations that had defined their lives. Governments, caught off guard, struggled to maintain control as widespread protests and demands for transparency erupted in every major city. The Aetheric Flux, now a tangible presence in the collective consciousness, fostered a sense of interconnectedness, dissolving old divisions and inspiring a new era of global unity. Aris, Elara, and Kael, watching from the Nexus, witnessed the dawn of a new age, a world no longer content with ignorance, but hungry for truth and understanding. Segment 2. Croft's Last Stand. Director Silas Croft, his authority shattered, and his operations exposed, found himself a pariah. His attempts to jam the broadcast and discredit the message had failed spectacularly, only serving to highlight the extent of his deception. With his back against the wall, he initiated a desperate, last-ditch effort to regain control. He activated contingency plans, deploying loyalist military units to suppress dissent and seize key communication infrastructure. He believed that if he could silence the voices of truth, he could still salvage some semblance of order. But his forces, demoralized and facing a globally unified populace, found themselves overwhelmed. Croft's last stand was not a battle for victory, but a desperate struggle against the inevitable tide of change. Segment 3. Lena's Triumph. Lena Petrova, now a celebrated figure, stood at the forefront of the global uprising. Her art, once a personal expression, had become a universal language of resistance. Her network, once a small group of activists, had grown into a formidable global movement, coordinating peaceful protests, organizing humanitarian aid, and establishing alternative communication channels. She worked tirelessly, her voice resonating with a newfound power, inspiring millions to demand accountability and justice. The systematic dismantling of her life by Croft had inadvertently forged her into a powerful leader, a symbol of hope and defiance for a world yearning for change. Her triumph was not just personal, it was a victory for the collective human spirit. Segment 4. The Nexus as a beacon. The Nexus, now a recognized global heritage site, became a beacon of hope and knowledge. Scientists, philosophers, and spiritual leaders from around the world flocked to the Crimson Wastes, eager to study the obelisk and learn from the Whisperers. Aris, with Kael by his side, became a reluctant mentor, sharing the profound insights gained from the Aetheric Flux. The obelisk, no longer a secret, began to reveal more of its wisdom, guiding humanity towards a future of sustainable energy, interstellar exploration, and harmonious coexistence. The Nexus was not just a place, it was a living library, a university of cosmic knowledge open to all who sought truth. Segment 5. The Fall of Project Chimera. With the global uprising gaining momentum, Project Chimera, once a clandestine powerhouse, crumbled. Its facilities were seized, its secrets exposed, and its personnel held accountable. The advanced technology, once hoarded for military dominance, was now being repurposed for the benefit of all humanity. The Kronos engine, once a symbol of fear, was being studied for its potential to revolutionize transportation and energy production. The fall of Project Chimera was a symbolic victory, a testament to the power of truth and the collective will of a unified humanity. It marked the end of an era of secrecy and manipulation and the beginning of a new age of transparency and collaboration. Segment 6. The New World Order. The old world order, built on nationalistic divisions and geopolitical power struggles, began to dissolve. A new global paradigm emerged, one based on shared knowledge, mutual respect, and a collective commitment to the well-being of all life. International cooperation flourished, driven by the common goal of understanding and harnessing the etheric flux for the betterment of humanity. The Whisperers, once a marginalized tribe, became revered guardians of ancient wisdom, their insights integrated into the new global governance structures. The world was not perfect, challenges remained, but a fundamental shift had occurred, a collective realization that humanity's true potential lay in unity, not division. Segment 7. Aris's new purpose. Aris Thorne, no longer a hunted man, found a new purpose in guiding humanity through this unprecedented era of change. He dedicated his life to bridging the gap between ancient wisdom and modern science, working alongside Kael to unlock the full potential of the etheric flux. He became a symbol of courage and integrity, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming power, one individual's commitment to truth can ignite a global revolution. His journey, which began in the shadows of a secret facility, had led him to the forefront of a cosmic awakening, a testament to the transformative power of a whispered truth that had finally found its voice. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it was a future filled with boundless possibilities. Chapter 12. The Resonance of Unity. Segment 1. The Global Dialogue begins. In the wake of the global broadcast, the world did not just wake up, began to speak. The silence that had once allowed Project Chimera to flourish was replaced by a vibrant, chaotic, and ultimately hopeful global dialogue. Scientists from across the globe, no longer bound by national security oaths, began to openly share their research on the etheric flux. Philosophers and ethicists debated the implications of a technology that could bridge the gap between worlds, while ordinary citizens organized community forums to discuss how this new understanding could improve their daily lives. The Nexus, once a hidden anomaly, was now the focal point of this conversation, a place where the ancient wisdom of the Whisperers met the inquisitive spirit of modern humanity. Aris Thorne, watching from the heart of the Crimson Wastes, felt a profound sense of relief. The truth was no longer his burden alone, but a shared responsibility. Segment 2. The Whisperers' New Role. The Whisperers, once a reclusive tribe living on the fringes of society, found themselves thrust into the center of the global stage. Their ancient knowledge of the etheric flux, once dismissed as myth, was now recognized as a vital key to humanity's future. Kael, the Elder, became a sought-after advisor, his insights into the ethical and spiritual dimensions of the technology providing a necessary balance to the purely scientific approach. The Whisperers did not seek power or fame. They saw their new role as a sacred duty, a way to ensure that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. They opened their ancient settlements to researchers and students, teaching them to listen to the desert and respect the delicate balance of the flux. Their presence was a constant reminder that true progress required not just technological advancement, but a deeper connection to the natural world. Segment 3. Croft's Shadowy Remnants. Despite the fall of Project Chimera, the shadows of the past did not vanish overnight. Director Silas Croft, though a fugitive, still commanded the loyalty of a small, dedicated group of former operatives. They operated from hidden bunkers and encrypted networks, their goal not to regain power but to sabotage the new global cooperation. They viewed the open sharing of etheric flux research as a threat to national security, a dangerous experiment that could lead to global catastrophe. They initiated a series of covert operations, targeting research facilities and spreading disinformation designed to sow fear and doubt. Croft, though diminished, remained a dangerous variable, a reminder that the transition to a new era would not be without its challenges. The battle for truth had been won, but the struggle to protect it was just beginning. Segment 4. Elara's investigative legacy. Elara Vance, having achieved the ultimate scoop, did not rest on her laurels. She recognized that the exposure of Project Chimera was just the beginning of a much larger story. She established an independent investigative agency dedicated to uncovering government secrets and ensuring transparency in the development of etheric flux technology. Her agency became a watchdog, a powerful voice for accountability in a world still grappling with the implications of the new reality. Elara's investigative legacy was not just about exposing lies, but about fostering a culture of truth, where information was a public good rather than a tool of control. She continued to report from the Crimson Wastes, her dispatches providing a vital link between the Nexus and the rest of the world, ensuring that the voices of the Whisperers and the insights of Aris Thorne were heard by all. Segment 5. Lena's Artistic Revolution. Lena Petrova's artistic revolution continued to gain momentum, her work becoming a visual chronicle of the global awakening. Her studio in Port Horizon was now a world-renowned center for activist art, a place where creativity and social change were inextricably linked. Her paintings, once a personal refuge, now adorned the walls of international organizations and public spaces, their vibrant colors and powerful imagery inspiring a new generation of artists to use their talents for the betterment of humanity. Lena's influence extended beyond the art world. She became a prominent advocate for the ethical use of etheric flux technology, her voice a powerful reminder of the human cost of secrecy and manipulation. Her journey from a targeted artist to a global leader was a testament to the transformative power of courage and conviction. Segment 6. The Scientific Renaissance. The open sharing of etheric flux research sparked a scientific renaissance unlike any in human history. Breakthroughs in energy production, transportation, and communication occurred at an unprecedented pace, driven by a spirit of collaboration rather than competition. The Kronos engine, once a weapon of war, was being redesigned as a tool for peaceful exploration, its potential to bridge the vast distances of space now a tangible reality. Scientists from different cultures and backgrounds worked together, their diverse perspectives leading to innovative solutions and a deeper understanding of the fundamental laws of the universe. The etheric flux was no longer a mystery to be feared, but a resource to be harnessed for the benefit of all life, a catalyst for a new era of human ingenuity and discovery. Segment 7. Aris's Vision for the Future. Aris Thorne, standing before the obelisk at the Nexus, looked out over the vast expanse of the Crimson Wastes, his mind filled with a vision for the future. He saw a world where the etheric flux was not just a source of power, but a bridge between cultures, a way to foster understanding and cooperation on a global scale. He saw humanity taking its first steps into the cosmos, not as conquerors, but as explorers, guided by the wisdom of the celestial architects and the resilience of the human spirit. He knew that the path ahead would be difficult, that there would be setbacks and challenges, but he also knew that humanity had finally found its voice and that the whispered truth had become a global anthem. The future was no longer a secret to be guarded, but a destiny to be shared, a journey into the heart of the universe where the resonance of unity would finally be heard by all. Chapter 13. The Fractured Peace. Segment 1. The Fragility of Truth. The initial euphoria of the global awakening began to settle into a complex, often turbulent reality. While the message of the Aetheric Flux had reached millions, the transition from an old world of secrets to a new one of transparency was fraught with friction. In the halls of power, former officials who had once operated in the shadows of Project Chimera now faced public tribunals, their testimonies revealing a web of corruption that ran deeper than anyone had suspected. Aris Thorne, though no longer a fugitive, found himself a central figure in these proceedings, his scientific expertise required to untangle the technical lies that had sustained the project for decades. He felt the weight of this new responsibility, realizing that exposing the truth was only the first step. The harder task was ensuring that the truth led to genuine, lasting justice. Segment 2. The Rise of the Technocrats. As the scientific renaissance flourished, a new class of influence emerged, the technocrats. These were individuals and corporations who, while ostensibly supporting the open-source nature of Aetheric Flux research, sought to dominate its practical application. They argued that the complexity of the technology required centralized management and expert oversight, a narrative that subtly echoed the control mechanisms of the past. Elara Vance, through her investigative agency, began to track these emerging power structures, recognizing the familiar patterns of greed and ambition. She warned that the liberation of the flux could easily be replaced by a new form of corporate enclosure if the public remained complacent. The battle for the desert's secrets had shifted from the military to the boardroom, and the stakes were just as high. Segment 3. Kael's Warning. Deep within the crimson wastes, Kael observed the influx of researchers and observers with a growing sense of unease. While he welcomed the genuine seekers of knowledge, he sensed a discordant energy among those who viewed the Nexus merely as a resource to be exploited. He spoke to Aris about the spiritual pollution that accompanied the purely materialistic pursuit of the flux. Kael warned that the etheric resonance drive was not just a machine, but a reflection of the intent of its users. If humanity approached the technology with the same old patterns of dominance and exploitation, the flux would eventually react, potentially leading to a catastrophic imbalance. His ancient wisdom served as a sobering counterpoint to the unbridled optimism of the scientific community, a reminder that power without wisdom is a dangerous path. Segment 4. Lena's Artistic Descent. Lena Petrova, sensing the shifting tides, turned her artistic focus toward the new threats. Her latest exhibition, titled The Gilded Cage, featured installations that depicted the subtle ways in which the new technocrats were attempting to commodify the etheric flux. Her work was a provocative critique of the emerging status quo, challenging the audience to look beyond the shiny promises of a technological utopia and see the potential for new forms of inequality. The exhibition sparked intense debate, drawing both praise from activists and sharp criticism from the corporate interests she targeted. Lena remained undeterred, her studio becoming a sanctuary for those who believed that the true value of the flux lay in its ability to empower individuals, not just enrich corporations. Segment 5. Croft's Ghostly Influence. From his hidden sanctuary, Silas Croft watched the rise of the technocrats with a cynical satisfaction. He recognized many of his former associates among the new corporate leaders, their methods refined, but their goals essentially the same. He began to exert a ghostly influence, feeding these corporations classified data and strategic insights he had salvaged from the ruins of Project Chimera. His goal was to create a shadow state within the new global order, a network of influence that would eventually allow him to reassert control. He understood that the public's memory was short. and that if he could make the new technology indispensable while keeping its core secrets hidden, he could eventually return to power. The man was gone, but his ideology was proving remarkably resilient. Segment 6. The First Anomaly. The first sign of the imbalance Kael had warned about appeared in a remote research outpost in the northern reaches of Viridia. A group of corporate scientists attempting to push the limits of the etheric resonance drive without proper safeguards triggered a localized space-time distortion. The anomaly, though brief, caused significant structural damage and left several researchers in a state of profound psychological distress. The incident was quickly downplayed by the corporation involved, but Aris, alerted by his own sensors at the Nexus, knew the truth. He realized that the spiritual pollution Kael spoke of was manifesting as physical instability. The technology was reacting to the reckless intent of its users, a warning that the universe would not be easily tamed by those who lacked respect for its fundamental laws. Segment 7. A Call to the Nexus. Recognizing the growing danger, Aris Thorne issued a global call for a summit at the Nexus. He invited scientists, philosophers, indigenous leaders, and even representatives from the emerging technocratic corporations. His goal was to establish a universal charter for the Aetheric Flux, a set of ethical and practical guidelines that would govern the development and use of the technology. He knew the summit would be a battlefield of competing interests, but he also knew it was the only way to prevent a descent into a new era of chaos and exploitation. As the first delegates began to arrive in the Crimson Wastes, the air at the Nexus crackled with a renewed intensity, a silent testament to the importance of the task ahead. The future of humanity was once again hanging in the balance, and the desert was waiting to see if its lessons had truly been learned. Chapter 14. The Summit of Shadows. Segment 1. The Gathering at the Nexus. The Crimson Wastes, once a place of absolute isolation, now hummed with the arrival of the world's most influential figures. Aris Thorne's call for a summit had drawn a diverse crowd, idealistic scientists, wary indigenous leaders, and the sharp-suited representatives of the new technocratic conglomerates. The Nexus itself seemed to react to the influx of conflicting intentions, the etheric flux pulsing with a restless, erratic rhythm. Aris stood at the edge of the crystalline amphitheatre, watching the delegates settle into their temporary quarters. He felt a profound sense of responsibility. This summit was not just about policy, but about the very soul of the technology he had helped unveil. The air was thick with unspoken agendas, and he knew that beneath the veneer of cooperation, a fierce battle for control was about to begin. Segment 2. The Technocratic Proposal. The summit opened with the presentation by Marcus Vane, the charismatic CEO of Aetheric Dynamics, the leading technocratic corporation. Vane spoke eloquently of a future powered by the Flux, a world of limitless energy and effortless travel. However, his proposal for the Universal Charter was heavily weighted toward corporate oversight and intellectual property protections. He argued that only large-scale industrialization could bring the benefits of the technology to the masses, a process that required significant capital and centralized control. Elara Vance, sitting in the press gallery, noted the subtle ways Vane's language echoed the justifications of Project Chimera. The promise of progress was being used as a shield for the consolidation of power, and she could see the delegates from smaller nations shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Segment 3. Kael's Silent Protest. Kael and the Whisperers did not participate in the formal debates. Instead, they maintained a silent vigil at the base of the obelisk, their presence a constant, unsettling reminder of the technology's ancient and spiritual roots. Kael's eyes, filled with a deep, sorrowful wisdom, seemed to pierce through the corporate rhetoric. He refused to engage with the technocrats on their terms, believing that that the true value of the flux could not be measured in kilowatts or profit margins. His silent protest was more powerful than any speech, a living testament to a way of life that prioritized balance over dominance. Many of the scientists, moved by the Whisperer's quiet dignity, began to question the purely materialistic approach advocated by Vane and his associates. Segment 4. The Shadow in the Room. As the debates grew more heated, a series of strange technical glitches began to plague the summit's communication systems. Encrypted files were leaked, private conversations were intercepted, and the holographic displays flickered with distorted images. Aris, investigating the source of the interference, discovered a sophisticated malware signature that he recognized with a chill. It was a refined version of the surveillance tools used by Silas Croft. The ghost of Project Chimera was present at the summit, a shadowy influence working to sow discord and undermine the possibility of a genuine consensus. Croft was not just watching. He was actively sabotaging the proceedings, his goal to ensure that no unified charter could ever be established. Segment 5. Lena's visual intervention. Lena Petrova, having travelled to the Nexus for the summit, staged a visual intervention that disrupted the formal proceedings. She projected a series of massive, haunting images onto the canyon walls surrounding the amphitheatre. The images depicted the environmental and human cost of the first anomaly, the distorted faces of the affected researchers, and the stark beauty of the desert being encroached upon by industrial machinery. It was a visceral, emotional counterpoint to the sterile charts and graphs of the technocrats. The delegates were forced to confront the reality of their decisions, the potential for catastrophe that lay beneath the promises of a technological utopia. Lena's intervention broke the momentum of Vane's proposal, forcing a shift in the dialogue towards safety and ethical responsibility. Segment 6. The Fractured Consensus. By the third day of the summit, the possibility of a unified charter seemed to be slipping away. The technocrats refused to budge on their demands for control, while the indigenous leaders and independent scientists insisted on transparency and community oversight. The interference from Croft's shadow network continued to escalate, creating an atmosphere of paranoia and distrust. Aris, caught in the middle, struggled to find a middle ground. He realized that the Universal Charter was becoming a battleground for two fundamentally different visions of humanity's future, one based on centralized power and exploitation, and the other on decentralized cooperation and respect for the natural world. The consensus was fracturing, and the Nexus itself seemed to be reflecting the discord, the Aetheric Flux growing increasingly unstable. Segment 7. The Final Warning. The summit reached a breaking point when a massive energy surge triggered by the instability of the flux rocked the entire amphitheatre. The obelisk flared with a blinding white light, and a resonant hum more powerful than any before filled the air. The delegates were thrown to the ground, their equipment failing, their voices silenced by the sheer power of the resonance. In the sudden, terrifying quiet that followed, Kael stepped forward, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "The desert has spoken," he said, his eyes fixed on the stunned delegates. "The flux will not be tamed by those who seek only to own it. This is your final warning. Either you find a path of balance, or the technology you seek to control will become the instrument of your own destruction." The summit ended, not with a signed charter, but with a profound, chilling realization of the power they were dealing with. The battle for the future had only just begun. Chapter 15. The Echoes of the Void. Segment 1. The Aftermath of the Surge. The silence that followed the obelisk's massive energy surge was heavier than the roar that preceded it. Delegates from the failed summit scrambled to gather their malfunctioning equipment, their faces pale with a newfound respect or terror for the power they had tried to legislate. Aris Thorne stood at the center of the crystalline amphitheater, his hands still tingling from the residual static in the air. He looked at the obelisk, which had returned to a low, rhythmic pulse. But the atmosphere in the Crimson Wastes had fundamentally changed. The Aetheric Flux was no longer a passive resource. It had demonstrated a defensive consciousness. Aris realized that the Universal Charter was now irrelevant. The technology itself had set the terms of its engagement, and humanity was failing to meet them. Segment 2. The Technocrats' Retreat. Marcus Vane and his entourage from Etheric Dynamics were among the first to depart, their departure marked by a hurried, defensive posture. The surge had fried several of their proprietary sensors, a multi-million-dollar loss that Vane viewed not as a warning, but as a technical challenge to be overcome. In the privacy of his armored transport, Vane's charisma vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating intensity. He didn't care about the spirit of the desert. He cared about the fact that the obelisk had successfully repelled his attempts at data extraction. He ordered his research teams to accelerate their work on flux shielding, a technology designed to insulate their machines from the obelisk's interference. To Vane, the Nexus was no longer just a source of energy, it was an adversary to be conquered. Segment 3. Elara's new lead. Elara Vance, staying behind as the crowds thinned, found a discarded datapad near the edge of the amphitheater. It had been partially melted by the energy surge, but her agency's technicians were able to recover a fragment of its memory. The data contained a series of encrypted coordinates located far outside the Crimson Wastes, in the deep, uncharted waters of the Azure Sea. These coordinates were linked to a project codenamed Abyssal Echo, a secret initiative funded by a consortium of technocratic corporations. Elara sensed a new layer of the conspiracy. While the world's attention was focused on the desert, the corporations were already seeking alternative, perhaps more compliant, sources of the etheric flux beneath the ocean floor. The battle for transparency was expanding into the deep blue. Segment 4. Kael's departure. Kael approached Aris as the sun began to set, his silhouette long and thin against the red rocks. He informed Aris that the Whisperers would be withdrawing further into the hidden canyons of the wastes. The presence of so many discordant intentions had bruised the land, and Kael believed that the Nexus needed time to heal without the constant scrutiny of outsiders. He warned Aris that his role as a bridge was becoming increasingly dangerous. By standing between the ancient wisdom and the modern greed, Aris was making himself a target for both. Kael's departure felt like the loss of a moral compass, leaving Aris alone in the vast, humming silence of the desert, tasked with guarding a secret that the world was determined to tear apart. Segment 5. The Shadow State's Move. From his hidden bunker, Silas Croft analyzed the data from the summit's failure. He was pleased. The discord he had sown had prevented any unified oversight, leaving the field open for the corporations to compete and eventually fail. Croft understood that the technocrats' arrogance would lead to more anomalies, more disasters, and eventually a public outcry for the order and security that only he could provide. He began to leak more advanced, yet subtly flawed, designs to etheric dynamics, ensuring that their next steps would be even more reckless. He was playing a long game of controlled chaos, waiting for the moment when the world would be so terrified of the etheric flux that they would beg for a tyrant to chain it. Segment 6. Lena's Underground Network. Back in Port Horizon, Lena Petrova's studio had transformed into a literal underground hub. Fearing a crackdown by the technocrats, she had moved her most sensitive operations into a network of repurposed industrial basements. Here, she coordinated with Elara's agency, using her art as a cover for the distribution of encrypted information. Her latest series of paintings, The Abyssal Truth, featured haunting depictions of underwater structures, a subtle hint to her followers about the new front in the war for truth. Lena was no longer just an artist. She was the heart of a burgeoning resistance, a network of individuals who realized that the new dawn was being eclipsed by a new form of corporate darkness. Segment 7, The Call of the Deep. Aris, prompted by Elara's discovery of the abyssal echo coordinates, felt a strange new resonance. It wasn't the rhythmic pulse of the desert obelisk, but a low, mournful vibration that seemed to come from the very earth beneath his feet, traveling from the distant sea. He realized that the etheric flux was not confined to the Crimson Wastes. It was a global network, a circulatory system for the planet's hidden energy. The corporation's attempts to tap into it in the deep ocean were like needles piercing a vital organ. He knew he couldn't stay in the desert forever. To protect the Nexus, he had to follow the echoes to the Azure Sea and confront the shadows where they were most hidden. The journey was shifting from the heights of the desert to the depths of the ocean, and the truth was becoming more elusive with every fathom. Chapter 16, The Abyssal Threshold. Segment 1, Departure from the Crimson Wastes. The red dust of the Crimson Wastes settled behind the rugged utility vehicle as Aris Thorne and Elara Vance began their long journey toward the coast. The transition from the dry, humming heat of the desert to the humid, salt-tinged air of the lowlands was jarring, a physical manifestation of the shifting focus of their mission. Aris kept his custom sensor array active, watching the readings fluctuate as they moved further from the Nexus. The desert's pulse was fading, replaced by a chaotic background noise of industrial activity and urban sprawl. He felt a pang of loss leaving the Whisperers behind, but the data fragment Elara had recovered was a compass he couldn't ignore. The abyssal echo was no longer just a name on a discarded pad, it was a destination that promised a deeper, darker truth than the desert had ever revealed. Segment 2, The Port of Shadows. They arrived at Oakhaven, a bustling port city that served as the gateway to the Azure Sea. Once a quiet fishing hub, it had been transformed by corporate investment into a high-tech logistics center. Massive cranes loomed over the docks like skeletal giants, and the air was thick with the smell of diesel and ozone. Elara used her agency's contacts to secure a nondescript warehouse near the water, a temporary base of operations far from the prying eyes of the technocrats. As she set up her communication gear, she noticed the heavy presence of private security forces, men in tactical gear with the Aetheric Dynamics logo on their sleeves. The city was under a soft occupation, its economy and its secrets now owned by the very people they were trying to expose. Segment 3, Intelligence from the Underground. Back in Port Horizon, Lena Petrova worked through the night to provide Aris and Elara with the logistical support they needed. Her underground network had successfully intercepted a shipping manifest destined for a platform in the Azure Sea known as Station Zero. The manifest listed specialized deep-sea drilling equipment and high-capacity energy conduits, far beyond what would be needed for standard oil or gas exploration. Lena relayed this information through a series of encrypted bursts, her heart racing with the knowledge of the risks she was taking. She also sent a warning. Marcus Vane had been spotted in Oakhaven only hours before their arrival. The CEO was personally overseeing the Abyssal Echo, suggesting that the project was nearing a critical phase. Segment 4. The Architect of Chaos. Silas Croft, monitoring the communications from his bunker, watched the pieces move across the board with a sense of grim satisfaction. He had anticipated Aris's move toward the sea. In fact, he had subtly encouraged it by allowing the datapad to be found. Croft knew that the underwater etheric flux was far more volatile than the desert variety, and he wanted Aris to witness the inevitable disaster firsthand. He began to feed Station Zero a series of experimental calibration codes, ostensibly to stabilize their energy extraction, but in reality designed to create a feedback loop. Croft wasn't just a spectator, he was the conductor of a symphony of destruction, and the Azure Sea was his chosen stage. Segment 5. The Coastal Reconnaissance. Under the cover of a thick coastal fog, Aris and Elara took a small, rented boat out into the harbour. Aris deployed a submersible drone, its cameras providing a grainy, green-tinted view of the seabed. As the drone moved further from the shore, the sensor readings began to spike. It wasn't the rhythmic hum of the Nexus, but a jagged, erratic vibration that seemed to emanate from a massive, underwater structure miles offshore. The structure was sprawling, a labyrinth of pipes and glowing modules that looked more like a parasitic growth than a piece of engineering. This was Station Zero, the heart of the abyssal echo, and it was already drawing massive amounts of energy from a hidden rift in the ocean floor. Segment 6. The First Disturbance. As they watched the drones feed, the water around their boat began to churn. It wasn't a storm or a current, but a localized upheaval, as if the sea itself was reacting to the energy extraction below. Strange bioluminescent patterns flickered beneath the surface, echoing the symbols Aris had seen on the ancient schematics. The air grew cold, and a low, mournful sound, the same vibration Aris had felt in the desert, vibrated through the hull of their boat. The etheric flux in the deep was waking up, and unlike the desert's defensive surge, this felt like a cry of pain. The sea was being violated, and the consequences were already beginning to manifest in the physical world. Segment 7. The Abyssal Realization. Aris pulled the drone back, just as a massive surge of energy blacked out its cameras. He looked at Elara, his face pale in the dim light of the boat's cabin. "They're not just extracting energy," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They're trying to force the rift open." The realization was staggering. The technocrats weren't content with the natural flow of the flux. They wanted to tear a hole into the source itself, regardless of the cost to the planet's stability. Station Zero was a weapon of mass extraction, and if they didn't stop it, the Azure Sea would become the epicenter of a global catastrophe. The threshold had been crossed, and the abyss was starting to look back. Chapter 17. The Abyssal Descent. Segment 1. The Weight of the Deep. The realization of Station Zero's true purpose hung heavy in the salt-thickened air of the boat's cabin. Aris Thorne stared at the static-filled monitors, his mind racing through the physics of a forced rift opening. The etheric flux beneath the Azure Sea was under immense pressure, and the technocrats were essentially drilling into a pressurized vein of reality itself. He knew that if the rift were to tear uncontrollably, the resulting energy discharge would not just destroy the station, it would create a localized collapse of space-time that could trigger tsunamis and seismic shifts across the entire Viridian coastline. The mission had shifted from observation to a desperate race against a clock that only he could hear ticking. Segment 2. Elara's Tactical Gamble. Elara Vance, sensing Aris's mounting dread, knew they couldn't wait for a formal investigation. She reached out to her agency's most daring contact, a former deep-sea salvage expert named Jax, who operated a modified high-pressure submersible out of a hidden cove near Oakhaven. Jax was a man who lived in the grey areas of the law, but he had a deep-seated hatred for the corporate giants that had ruined his industry. Elara offered him a deal, a chance to strike a blow against etheric dynamics in exchange for a ride to the seabed. It was a tactical gamble, putting their lives in the hands of a mercenary, but it was the only way to reach the heart of the abyssal echo before the rift reached its breaking point. Segment 3, The Descent into Darkness. The transition from the surface to the deep was a slow descent into a world of crushing pressure and absolute darkness. Jax's submersible, the Obsidian Needle, groaned as it fought the increasing weight of the water. Aris sat in the cramped cockpit, his eyes fixed on the external sensors. As they passed the 1,000-meter mark, the bioluminescent patterns he had seen from the surface became more intense, swirling around the submersible like ghostly ribbons. These weren't natural organisms, they were manifestations of the flux, reacting to the presence of the needle. The sea was no longer just water. It was a medium for a power that was growing increasingly agitated by the industrial intrusion below. Segment 4. The Site of Station 0. As the Obsidian Needle cleared a final undersea ridge, Station 0 came into full view. It was a terrifying marvel of engineering, a sprawling, multi-tiered complex anchored to the ocean floor by massive, glowing pylons. At its center, a colossal drilling rig was positioned directly over a shimmering, jagged fissure in the seabed. The energy emanating from the rift was so intense that it distorted the light around it, creating a shimmering, hallucinogenic effect. Aris could see the massive conduits pulsing with a violent violet light as they channeled the raw flux into the station's storage modules. It was a parasitic operation on a cosmic scale, and the station looked like a tick gorging itself on the lifeblood of the planet. Segment 5, The Infiltration Plan. Jax maneuvered the needle into a maintenance bay on the station's outer perimeter, utilizing a series of spoofed access codes Elara's team had provided. The docking was a tense affair, the submersible's hull scraping against the station's reinforced plating. Once inside the pressurized airlock, Aris and Elara donned specialized environment suits, their movements heavy and deliberate in the artificial gravity. Their goal was the central control room, where Aris hoped to initiate a controlled shutdown of the drilling rig. They moved through the station's corridors, which were filled with the hum of machinery and the hurried footsteps of corporate technicians. The atmosphere was one of frantic activity, a sense that the project was nearing its climax. Segment 6. The Encounter with Vane. Just as they reached the final security bulkhead, the doors hissed open to reveal Marcus Vane himself, flanked by a team of heavily armed security guards. Vane didn't look surprised. He looked triumphant. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice smooth and devoid of its usual public warmth. "I knew you couldn't resist the call of the deep. You've always been drawn to the source, haven't you?" Vane gestured toward the massive viewing port behind him, which offered a direct view of the shimmering rift. "We're minutes away from a full stabilization. We're not just taking energy anymore, we're opening a doorway." Vane's eyes held a fanatical glint, the look of a man who believed he had finally conquered the gods. Segment 7, The Rift's Response. As Vane spoke, a violent tremor rocked the station, throwing everyone to the floor. The violet light from the rift intensified, turning into a blinding white glare that filled the control room, a low, resonant sound. A cry of pure, unadulterated power vibrated through the station's hull, shattering the reinforced glass of the smaller viewing ports. The etheric flux was no longer being extracted, it was pushing back. The forced rift was collapsing, and the energy feedback was beginning to tear the station apart from the inside out. Aris looked at the monitors, which were now displaying a series of catastrophic failure warnings. The threshold had been crossed, and the abyss was no longer just looking back, it was reaching out to reclaim what had been stolen. The battle for the deep had just become a fight for survival. Chapter 18. The Abyss Unleashed. Segment 1. The station's collapse. The violent tremor that rocked Station 0 was not a mere malfunction. It was the abyss itself, pushing back. The massive drilling rig, once a symbol of human technological might, began to buckle and tear, unable to withstand the raw, untamed power of the etheric flux. Alarms blared, a cacophony of warning signals that were quickly drowned out by the groaning metal and the roar of rushing water. Marcus Vane, his face contorted in a mixture of terror and disbelief, watched as the reinforced viewing port behind him spiderwebbed with cracks. Aris Thorne, despite the chaos, instinctively moved to shield Elara, his scientific mind already calculating the catastrophic implications of the rift's uncontrolled expansion. The fight for control was over. Now it was a fight for survival. Segment 2, Vane's desperate plea. As the station began its agonizing descent, Vane, his bravado shattered, turned to Aris, a desperate plea in his eyes. "Thorne, you understand this, you can stop it," he screamed over the din. Aris, however, knew it was too late for a simple shutdown. The feedback loop Croft had initiated, combined with Vane's reckless over-extraction, had created a runaway reaction. The etheric flux was no longer a resource to be controlled, it was a force of nature unleashed. He saw the terror in Vane's eyes, the sudden horrifying realization that he had played God and lost. The architect of the Abyssal Echo was now a victim of his own hubris, trapped in the very catastrophe he had engineered. Segment 3, Jax's heroic stand. Jax, the grizzled deep-sea expert, fought against the station's failing systems, trying to disengage the obsidian needle from the rapidly collapsing maintenance bay. The emergency lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows as the station groaned around them. "We're not going to make it if we stay docked," he yelled, his voice strained. He knew the risks, but his years in the deep had taught him that sometimes the only way out was through. With a final, desperate surge of power, he managed to sever the docking clamps, the needle lurching violently as it broke free. He was a man of the sea, and he would not let his vessel or his passengers be swallowed by the abyss without a fight. Segment 4. The Rift's Expansion. Outside the obsidian needle, the scene was one of unimaginable destruction. The rift in the seabed was no longer a fissure. It was a gaping maw, spewing forth raw, etheric flux in a blinding white torrent. The water around it boiled and churned, creating massive, localized whirlpools that threatened to drag everything into their depths. The station, now a twisted wreck of metal and glass, was being torn apart piece by piece, its remnants swallowed by the expanding void. Aris watched in horror as the energy readings on the needle's monitors spiked to catastrophic levels. This wasn't just a local event. The entire oceanic etheric flux network was being destabilized, threatening a global ecological collapse. Segment 5, Elara's final transmission. Elara, strapped into a seat in the obsidian needle, knew this might be their last chance. With trembling hands, she activated a long-range emergency beacon, overriding the jamming signals with a burst of raw data. She broadcast a single, desperate message, a final warning to the world. Station 0 has failed. The rift is open. The etheric flux is unstable. Humanity must unite or face extinction. She knew the transmission was fragmented, incomplete, but she hoped it would be enough, a final testament to the truth they had fought so hard to reveal. Her journalistic instinct, even in the face of annihilation, compelled her to bear witness. Segment 6. Croft's Grim Satisfaction. From his hidden bunker, Silas Croft watched the unfolding catastrophe with a grim, almost detached satisfaction. The images from his deep-sea drones, though distorted, confirmed the complete destruction of Station Zero. Vane's hubris had played directly into his hands. The global panic that would ensue would be immense, and in the chaos the world would once again turn to strong leadership, to the very security measures he had always advocated. He knew his plan was working, albeit with a higher cost than anticipated. The Aetheric Flux, now a terrifying, uncontrolled force, would be the ultimate justification for his vision of a controlled, centralized world. He had not lost, he had merely reshaped the battlefield. Segment 7. Lena's desperate plea for intervention. Lena Petrova, receiving Elara's fragmented emergency transmission, felt a cold dread grip her heart. The message was garbled, but the urgency was undeniable. She immediately relayed the information to her global network, urging them to demand immediate international intervention. She knew that if the etheric flux went critical, the consequences would be unimaginable. Her art studio became a frantic command center, coordinating pleas to world leaders, scientists, and even the whisperers at the Nexus. The global unity they had achieved was now being tested by an existential threat, and Lena knew that only a concerted global effort could avert the impending catastrophe. Segment 8. The Nexus reacts. Thousands of miles away at the Nexus, the obelisk began to pulse with an alarming intensity. Kael, sensing the profound disturbance in the etheric flux, knew that the abyssal echo had gone critical. The whisperers, their faces etched with concern, gathered around the obelisk, their ancient chants a desperate plea for balance. Aris's earlier warnings about the spiritual pollution of the flux resonated with a terrifying clarity. The Nexus, the heart of the desert's flux, was now directly connected to the oceanic disturbance, its stability threatened by the uncontrolled energy release. Kael knew that the balance of the entire planet was at stake, and that the Nexus might be their only hope for a solution. Segment 9. Aris's desperate solution. Inside the obsidian needle, Aris, battered but resolute, began to work frantically. He knew that trying to close the rift directly was impossible, the energy was too immense. But he also remembered the obelisk's teachings, the celestial architect's message of balance. He began to reconfigure the needle's systems, attempting to create a localized energy sink, a temporary conduit to redirect the runaway flux back into the planet's natural energy grid. It was a long shot, a desperate attempt to use the very technology that had caused the problem to mitigate its effects. He worked with a feverish intensity, his hands flying across the controls, knowing that every second counted. Segment 10. The Abyssal Roar. As Aris completed his modifications, the obsidian needle was violently buffeted by a massive wave of energy. The rift in the seabed unleashed a deafening abyssal roar, a sound that transcended the physical, echoing in the very souls of those who heard it. The ocean floor fractured further, and the white torrent of etheric flux intensified, threatening to consume everything. Aris activated his makeshift energy sink, a desperate prayer on his lips. The needle glowed with a faint blue light, a tiny beacon of hope against the overwhelming power of the unleashed abyss. The fate of the world now rested on a desperate gamble, a single, fragile vessel, and the courage of a few individuals facing the wrath of a cosmic force that they had barely begun to understand. The abyss had truly unleashed its fury, and humanity was now directly in its path. Chapter 19. The Eye of the Maelstrom. Segment 1. The Blue Beacon. The obsidian needle groaned under the immense pressure of the energy sink Aris had activated. A brilliant sapphire blue light erupted from the submersible's external emitters, cutting through the violent violet and white chaos of the unleashed rift. This wasn't just electricity. It was a harmonized frequency, a desperate attempt to speak the language of the Aetheric Flux. Aris watched the monitors with bated breath as the jagged energy spikes began to smooth out, the raw power of the abyss being drawn into the needle's reinforced capacitors. It was like trying to catch a hurricane in a bottle, and every rivet in the hull seemed to scream in protest. Segment 2. The Weight of the World. Inside the cramped cockpit, the air grew thin and metallic, ionized by the sheer volume of energy passing through the vessel. Elara gripped her armrests, her knuckles white, her eyes fixed on Aris. She saw the sweat pouring down his face, the way his hands trembled as he made micro-adjustments to the energy flow. He wasn't just a scientist anymore, he was a conductor, trying to lead a cosmic orchestra that wanted to tear him apart. The responsibility was staggering. If he failed, the resulting explosion would not just destroy them, but would likely trigger a chain reaction across the entire oceanic shelf. Segment 3. Jax's Grim Determination. Jax sat at the helm, his hands steady on the manual overrides. He ignored the sparks flying from the overhead panels and the ominous groans of the hull. His focus was entirely on maintaining the needle's position within the eye of the energy maelstrom. "Keep it steady, Doc," he grunted, his voice a low rumble against the roar of the abyss. He knew the structural limits of his ship better than anyone, and he knew they were pushing past them. But Jax was a man who had faced the worst the sea could throw at him, and he wasn't about to let a little cosmic interference finish him off. Segment 4. The Rift's Resistance. The rift, however, did not yield easily. It was as if the abyss possessed a primal, territorial instinct, fighting against the intrusion of the energy sink. A massive surge of counter-energy slammed into the needle, throwing Aris against his console. The blue light flickered, and for a terrifying moment the violet glare of the rift threatened to overwhelm them. The submersible spun wildly, caught in a localized gravity well created by the collapsing space-time. Aris scrambled back to his seat, his fingers flying across the controls, his mind racing to compensate for the sudden shift in the Flux's behavior. Segment 5. A Voice in the Static. Amidst the electronic screaming of the sensors, a faint, melodic sound began to emerge. It wasn't a mechanical alarm or a radio transmission, it was a resonant hum that seemed to vibrate directly in their minds. Aris recognized it instantly. It was the same frequency as the obelisk at the Nexus. The desert was reaching out to the sea. The two nodes of the Aetheric Flux were attempting to synchronize, to find a balance that would stabilize the entire network. Aris realized that he didn't have to fight the rift alone. He just had to facilitate the connection between the two ancient sources. Segment 6. The Global Resonance. Thousands of miles away, the obelisk at the Nexus flared with a brilliant white light, its resonance echoing across the globe. People in every city felt a sudden, profound sense of calm, a momentary pause in the chaos. The energy Aris was channeling through the needle was being mirrored by the Nexus, creating a global feedback loop of stabilization. Lena Petrova, watching the energy readings from her studio, saw the jagged lines on her monitors begin to harmonize. The world was witnessing a cosmic dialogue, a planetary-scale attempt to restore balance to a system that had been pushed to the brink. Segment 7, Croft's Final Gambit. Silas Croft, realizing that his plan for controlled chaos was being thwarted by the synchronization of the flux, initiated his final gambit. He activated a series of dormant high-altitude satellites designed to beam a disruptive high-frequency signal directly into the Nexus. He wanted to break the connection, to shatter the resonance and plunge the world back into a state of terrifying instability. He was a man who would rather see the world burn than lose control, and his finger hovered over the final activation command. He was the ultimate saboteur, the architect of a darkness that refused to fade. Segment 8, The Whisperer's Intervention. At the Nexus, Kael and the Whisperers sensed the incoming disruptive signal. They didn't have satellites or high-tech jamming equipment, but they had a connection to the land that Croft could never understand. They gathered in a circle around the obelisk, their ancient chants rising in a powerful rhythmic crescendo. They were channeling their own collective intent, their deep respect for the flux, into a protective shield around the obelisk. The disruptive signal from Croft's satellites hit the shield and dissipated, unable to penetrate the wall of ancient wisdom and unified purpose. The desert was defending its own. Segment 9, The Stabilization. Back in the deep, the obsidian needle finally found its rhythm. The blue light from the energy sink merged with the white resonance from the Nexus, creating a stable, shimmering conduit. The violet glare of the rift began to fade, the jagged edges of the fissure smoothing out as the etheric flux was drawn back into its natural channels. The violent churning of the water subsided, and the abyssal roar softened into a low, peaceful hum. Aris slumped in his seat, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his body trembling with the after-effects of the massive energy transfer. They had done it. The maelstrom was fading. Segment 10, The Aftermath of the Deep. As the obsidian needle began its slow ascent back to the surface, the three of them sat in a stunned, exhausted silence. The monitors showed the rift closing, the energy readings returning to a stable, albeit elevated, baseline. Station 0 was gone, its remnants scattered across the ocean floor, a silent monument to human hubris. Aris looked at Elara, and for the first time in weeks he saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. They had survived the abyss, and in doing so they had forged a connection that could never be broken. The world was still in a state of flux, but the immediate threat had passed. They were coming home, carrying with them a truth that was no longer a whisper, but a resonant global anthem. The eye of the maelstrom had passed, and a new, clearer day was beginning to dawn. Chapter 20. The Surface of a New Reality. Segment 1. Breaking the Surface. The obsidian needle breached the surface of the azure sea just as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The transition from the crushing, lightless depths to the open air felt like a rebirth. Aris, Elara, and Jack sat in the cockpit, squinting against the sudden brightness, their lungs expanding with the salt-tinged breeze that filtered through the vents. The water around them was calm now, the violent upheavals of the previous night replaced by a gentle, rhythmic swell. It was hard to believe that only hours ago, this very spot had been the epicenter of a potential global catastrophe. The sea looked unchanged, but Aris knew that beneath the waves the scars of Station 0 would remain for centuries. Segment 2. The Silent Harbour. As they motored back toward Oakhaven, the silence of the harbour was unsettling. The massive cranes of the corporate logistics centre stood idle, and the usual bustle of the docks was absent. It was as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for confirmation of what had transpired in the deep. Elara checked her satellite feed. The news of the undersea seismic event was already spreading, but the corporate media was still struggling to spin the narrative. The truth, however, was already out there, carried by the resonance that every human on the planet had felt. The age of controlled information was over. The world had felt the pulse of the abyss, and no amount of corporate PR could erase that sensation. Segment 3, the reunion in the warehouse. Back at their makeshift base in the warehouse, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and old coffee. Lena Petrova was already there, having travelled through the night to meet them. The reunion was brief and emotional, a silent acknowledgement of the risks they had all taken. Lena showed them the global data she had collected. The synchronization of the flux had been recorded by amateur sensors and university labs across every continent. The universal resonance, as the public was already calling it, had become an undeniable scientific fact. They were no longer a small group of rebels, they were the architects of a new understanding of reality. Segment 4. Croft's Disappearing Act. While the world celebrated the stabilization of the flux, Silas Croft was busy erasing his tracks. His hidden bunker was being systematically purged of all data, the servers melting under the heat of thermite charges. He knew that with the failure of the abyssal echo and the synchronization of the Nexus, his shadow state was no longer viable. But Croft was not a man to accept defeat. He moved to a secondary, even more remote location, a place where he could wait and watch. He understood that the new era would bring its own set of problems, its own vulnerabilities. He was a predator of the shadows, and he knew that eventually the light of the new dawn would fade, providing him with a new opportunity to strike. Segment 5. The Corporate Collapse. The fallout for Etheric Dynamics was swift and brutal. With the destruction of Station Zero and the exposure of their reckless experiments, the company's stock plummeted, and its board of directors faced immediate criminal investigations. Marcus Vane, who had miraculously survived the station's collapse in an escape pod, was taken into custody as soon as he reached the shore. The charismatic CEO, once the face of the technological future, was now the face of corporate greed and hubris. The collapse of Etheric Dynamics sent shockwaves through the global economy, forcing other technocratic conglomerates to reconsider their own aggressive expansion plans. The era of unchecked corporate dominance over the flux was coming to a crashing halt. Segment 6. The Whisperers return to the Nexus. In the Crimson Wastes, Kael and the Whisperers watched the sunrise from the base of the obelisk. The energy of the land had settled into a peaceful, steady hum, the bruise Kael had sensed earlier now beginning to heal. They knew that their role as guardians was more important than ever. The world would soon be coming to the Nexus, seeking answers and guidance. Kael prepared his people for the influx of seekers, teaching them how to share their wisdom without losing their identity. The desert was no longer a secret. It was a sanctuary, a place where humanity could learn to live in harmony with the power it had so nearly destroyed. Segment 7. Elara's new mission. Elara Vance sat at her desk in the warehouse, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she drafted her final report on the abyssal echo. This wasn't just a news story, it was a manifesto for a new kind of journalism, one based on radical transparency and a commitment to the public good. She announced the formation of the Global Truth Network, a decentralized organization of journalists, scientists, and activists dedicated to monitoring the use of etheric flux technology. She knew that the battle for truth would never truly be over, but she was determined to ensure that the voices of the people would always be louder than the whispers of the powerful. Segment 8. Aris's Scientific Responsibility. Aris Thorne spent the following days analyzing the data from the Obsidian Needle's energy sink. He realized that the synchronization of the flux had opened up new possibilities for clean, sustainable energy that didn't require the violent extraction methods used by the technocrats. He began to draft a series of open-source blueprints for resonance converters, devices that could tap into the natural flow of the flux without disturbing its balance. He felt a profound sense of responsibility to ensure that this technology was available to everyone, not just the wealthy and powerful. He was no longer just a physicist. He was a steward of a global resource, a man dedicated to using science for the benefit of all life. Segment 9. The First Global Assembly. A month after the events in the Azure Sea, the first global assembly on Aetheric Flux was held at the Nexus. This time, there were no corporate sponsors or secret agendas. Representatives from every nation, every culture, and every walk of life gathered in the crystalline amphitheater to discuss the future of the planet. The Universal Charter, once a failed proposal, was now a living document, a set of ethical guidelines co-authored by the people themselves. The atmosphere was one of hope and collaboration, a stark contrast to the paranoia and greed of the previous summit. Humanity was finally taking its first steps toward a truly unified future. Segment 10. The Horizon of Possibility. As the sun set over the crimson wastes on the final day of the assembly, Aris, Elara, and Lena stood together at the edge of the amphitheater. The obelisk glowed with a soft, steady light, its resonance a peaceful background hum to the voices of the delegates. They looked out over the desert, their eyes fixed on the horizon. The journey that had begun with a whispered secret in a secret facility had led them to the threshold of a new reality. The world was still in a state of flux, and the challenges ahead were immense, but for the first time in history, humanity was facing them together. The horizon was no longer a limit. It was a promise of endless possibility, a future where the truth was no longer a burden, but a light that guided them all. The first chapter of their new story had just begun.